at what point are we actually right?
It's really hard for us to think that your deepest moral convictions are a matter of perception.
How did we even get to the place where racism can be tolerated as a thing? That's a big question.
It's a big question. There might be 100 million people who believe in God. 50 million of those people think that God wants something very different when it comes to this issue than the other 50 million people. Who's right?
The people who have done the most horrific damage societally, culturally, oftentimes believe they're saving the world.
Someone came out on X saying this, maybe we should have AI child pornography because it's not hurting anyone.
It's almost like people would rather be wrong with a group of people who are also wrong than to be right and alone.
If you see yourself as chronically the victim, then you can't be the villain, perpetrator.
Yeah.
And then you're just a total monster to others, but you always see that it's justified as coming from a place of self-protection, not a place of actually causing harm.
Hey, before you get into this one, I wanted to just give you a heads up. We have Dr. Kurt with us today. He's a sociologist and a bunch of other things, extraordinarily intelligent. And I loved this conversation because we got to wrestle through how human beings delineate between fact, fiction, truth, and community and connection. So I'll tell you up front, a lot of times we're connecting things really closely to scripture, biblical roots. This is a very, very scientific episode. So it's not, we're not going to be connecting things into scripture. We're not going to be talking about necessarily verses that substantiate anything. We are talking about the scientific elements of how human beings communicate and connect, how tribes formulate opinions. I think it's got so many good implications, especially if you're in an environment with people who you might disagree with. How do you have conversations with those people and create connection in a way that fosters the ability to influence other people? I think you'll like it. I liked it. Enjoy the show. Everyone wants to get to the high places, but if you want to go high, you first have to go deep. What's up? Welcome back to the deep end. We have Dr. Kurt Gray with you. He is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Ohio State University, where he holds the Weary Foundation Endowed Chair in the social psychology of polarization and misinformation. That's a big words in that.
It's shorter. They cut the end part because it was too many words.
The misinformation part?
Yeah, and it's just in social psychology.
Well, by cutting the misinformation, it kind of feels like misinformation. Yeah. You want to go meta.
It's a contentious word. It's a contentious word. You know, keep it tight.
Yeah, it is a contentious word.
Yeah.
Dr. Kirk completed his PhD in social psychology at Harvard under the late Daniel Wegner and has since become one of the leading researchers in the science of moral psychology. He's got over 120 published papers, work featured in the New York Times, The Economist, Scientific American, Wired, NPR's Hidden Brain. You direct two research centers, the Deepest Beliefs Lab, which investigates how people's most foundational beliefs shape behavior in society, and the Center for the Science of Moral Understanding, which is dedicated to finding evidence-based solutions to political division and moral conflict. 2 books as of now.
Yep.
The Mind Club, Who Thinks, What Feels, and Why It Matters. And then in 2025, you released Outraged, Why We Fight About Morality and Politics, which is a fascinating idea. How's that book doing?
And How to Find Common Ground. We do like
forget about that.
Bring back together.
Who cares about common ground, man? Yes, that is part of the title. See, I have misinformation. I cut it off at the end. Why did you write that? What was that a book that you were just studying?
So I've studied kind of how our minds make our kind of moral beliefs for a long time. And it seemed like polarization was only going up and up. And I wanted to study how to reconnect with people that we disagree with and how to feel calm in our bodies and ourselves. And we talk about politics with like an Uber driver or your family over Thanksgiving.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Well, the way you find common ground is you hurl insults on social media.
That's right. Throw facts.
That's right.
Here's a fact you didn't know.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you have an interesting point in one of your books. You talk about facts don't really change people's minds either.
Exactly.
Nobody's read being like, that statistic is just so good that I'm going to change my whole moral compass.
Totally.
Over that.
Oh my goodness. I guess I was wrong about abortion this whole time. Thanks for that statistic.
Oh man. What a sensitive topic. I'm grateful for people like you who have done the work to study, because you get lost inside of these conflicts, especially now. Our era of politics right now is just, it feels like it's more divided than it's ever been. But is that true? Or is that just a recency bias thing?
I mean, we had the Civil War, and so it's pretty bad then.
That's true.
But as long as we've been collecting these data, it's as high as it's ever been, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And both sides always think that they are doing it for the right reasons and that they're correct. You don't see anyone who wakes up and wants to change the world to make it worse or more destructive.
That's right. Yeah. So I argue that in our minds, we have this destruction narrative, the story we tell ourselves about people we disagree with, that they're trying to burn it down like some superhero villain. But like no one like casts a vote just to be like, I want to burn it down.
Yeah.
I want to hurt everybody. And so everyone's doing their best to protect their families and communities.
Yeah.
It's the protection narrative is what I call it.
Interesting question for you on that. When you study history, it seems like maybe that is partly a predisposition to the human psyche, but then, you look through like the Vietnam War historical narrative and dehumanization was like taught from a top-down level. Mm-hmm. Do you think that at some level is the government weaponizing some of that to get us to fight in the middle?
I think there's always been, and I like this term a lot, conflict entrepreneurs. And those are the folks who make money, right? Who get power from making us fight. And so there's a ton of influence from elites to get us to fight, right? Yeah. It's modeled by politicians. There's unscrupulous, podcasters or TV personalities, right? That want us to fight because they get more clicks, make more money. So it's for sure a thing.
How much of that is wired inside of us evolutionarily where we need a common enemy?
We're a groupie species, right? We need to form groups to survive. And I talk about this in the book a little bit, right? Like we're kind of more of a prey species than a predator species, and we can chat about that. But we need people to survive. If like either one of us were alone on the Serengeti, we get eaten almost immediately, right? So we need to like group together. But if like we have one group and like those people have another group, it's natural that we're like, we're not that group. And so it's easy for us to want to kind of like attack that group and like really worry about being attacked too. And so it's easy to kind of sow division.
I want to ask you about the prey species in a second. But before we do, have you seen any of the studies, like, the hedonic treadmill and normalization and all that stuff? And if you go back in time to like 200 years, civilization is better now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
So you see these people online and they're like, it's worse, it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And it's like, no, life expectancy of medicine is better. Like, is there an element where it's like, we've just lost other things to have to group together to fight against, so we're fighting each other?
I mean, we see milder and milder things as really severe threats.
Yes.
And so it's exactly the kind of hedonic treadmill, or another phrase is concept creep, like the creep of harm. So it used to be when you left your house or your cave, right? They could get eaten by a panther. And so you had like these real worries about dying or getting injured. And today, if I walk outside your house, it's probably unlikely I'm going to get eaten by wolves. Knock on wood.
Hopefully.
Right? And so our mind is still like fixated on finding threats. And so because those really severe threats aren't present, we find kind of smaller things to worry about, like screen time and parents, right? If you go back 200 years ago and you're like, the biggest threat for your kids is they watch these like light shooting devices into their eyes a little bit too much, and parents would be like, I'm worried about my kid losing their arm in a factory,
Right, yeah.
And so what we are concerned about evolves because we're so safe now.
Yeah. There's an interesting book on that called The Anxious Generation. Is it Jonathan Haidt?
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of like screen time, but also social media, where kids are going through, for the first time, going through puberty on a world stage.
Right.
Which is, now we're finding out how dangerous that is, but we didn't have those risks 200 years ago.
Totally, right. We had like real reasons to be anxious 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Like little Billy gets locked in a fridge, and can't get out. Like all the kind of like PSAs when we were kids.
Yeah.
Like the world was more dangerous than it is today.
To what extent do you think we are now manufacturing our own threats that don't even exist?
I think to a large part, social media is helping us see a lot of threats. And I mean helping in scare quotes, because algorithms and the media companies make a lot of money by getting us to feel moral panics. So those moral panics used to be pretty infrequent, like Dungeons and Dragons, satanic panics, reefer madness. Those happen like every decade or so. But today, every minute you log into social media, there's not only a threat that it tells us about, but you can see virality metrics that tell us how many other people are worried about that threat. It's like every day, those Godzilla movies where you hear this like distant scream and then you like see this like people being like, ah, and like running by you.
Yeah.
I feel like that's social media every moment. Like there's other people screaming and these like threats.
Like social contagion.
Exactly.
Almost kicks in.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is, right? Other people are like afraid and you're like, oh my goodness, I should be afraid too. Yeah. Right? Like there's pitchforks and I should get my pitchfork too.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to keep going. I'm like a kid in a candy shop because I have so many questions about the mind. I mean, especially with where we are.
I spent my whole career studying this stuff.
If you need me to dial in, I'll dial in, but I'm just going to be like, there's a bird. Let's go after this.
Let's do it. Squirrel.
Yeah, squirrel. And jump in whenever you want. But you have, so let me introduce this premise real fast, and I think it'll tie into a fascinating discussion about how, not only what the problem is, but how we can contribute to the solution. Sure. But you have a model on morality that I think is brilliant and also a little bit terrifying. And I don't think you've read his books. So essentially you define morality as the perception of harm. And when there's a victim and a villain, we sort of perceive that morality would be like writing the scales. Can you maybe clean up that model that you have of morality? What is morality according to your work in sociology?
Yeah, so I think it's important to distinguish between what is like right and wrong in an ultimate kind of like universal sense. Maybe that's what philosophers or preachers argue about. So my model is really about moral judgment. Like, what do everyday people, you and I, listeners, what do they condemn as wrong? And so that model about moral judgment is really about the perception of harm, or I think even easier to think about victimization. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. If you perceive someone getting victimized, you condemn that. And so child abuse, right? If you're walking down the street and you just see someone just like hitting their kid, kicking a dog, right? We kind of like viscerally react. We like, that's wrong. And the reason we have that kind of evolved understanding of morality is because in our groups, if someone's, the kind of person who harms people, we need to kick them out of our group. We need to punish them. And so all of us share this kind of template or concept of what's wrong, and that's victimization. But I think the trick is that we all perceive victimization a little differently depending on our upbringing, depending on our religious beliefs, all sorts of things, right? So like you and I can look at the same thing and say like, I think that burning a flag like causes real harm. And you might think, well, it doesn't at all. And then we'll disagree about that, deeply.
And then fight about it physically.
And fight about it, yeah.
Yeah. How did you, at what point in your childhood development spectrum did you decide to study victimization? Like how do you become you? What's the story?
Well, I didn't, I wasn't like a 6-year-old and be like, I want to study people's perceptions of victimization. Boy. When I was a 6-year-old, I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Nice.
Because my dad's in the Navy. And so I thought it looked pretty, Top Gun, right? Yeah. Like every little boy's like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Oh yeah.
And then I realized that like Canada, where I grew up, doesn't have an amazing like Top Gun setup,
a little underwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, like you have to live in like rural Manitoba.
Where is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
And you're like flying planes around. Like you didn't get like the aircraft carrier and like the volleyball playing or like the motorcycle, all the Top Gun things.
Yeah.
And so I switched from that into, thought about a lot of things, talked about this a little bit, but one of the things I thought I wanted to do when I was a kid, I was like searching for meaning and I wanted to understand how the world
6 years
worked.
old?
No, not at 6 years old.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, that's
okay,
a good. Yeah, that's a good question.
He's really smart.
Yeah, like, dude, that's
precocious.
crazy.
He's a prodigy.
6 years old,
precocious.
I was excited that I got to try coffee. Like,
That's right.
That
That's
was
right.
the highlight of life.
And so but let's say like ninth grade.
Oh,
Like ninth grade. We're all
yeah.
like searching for something. Like, what's
Yeah.
the nature of truth? What's the nature of the universe? And I stumbled across these books by Dion Fortune on theosophy. Like, what's the nature of the universe? Stuff that you've like talked about
Yeah.
in previous episodes. Like, what is the ultimate structure of the universe? And I did some reading on like Kabbalah. I did some reading on like Logos. All these kind of deep things. And my first girlfriend in ninth grade, I went over to her house. We hung out, and then her mom had to drive me back to the train. I lived in Calgary. There's like a little train system, and so she drive me back to the train. It's like just me and her, and she's like, "Oh, Kurt, like what do you want to do when you grow up?" And maybe I should have said fighter pilot because that was cooler. But I was like, I want to explore and understand the mysteries of the universe. I want to be an occultist. And she was like, cool.
That's weird.
Yeah, that's super weird. And so she dropped me off at the train station, and then her daughter and I broke up not too long after that. I don't think admitting that I wanted to be an occultist had any part of it. I did tarot. I was like reading tarot cards, and I got some, a set of runes, like the Scandinavian way to like predict the future. And then eventually, ... kind of like a long line to figure out that really what I really wanted to study was the science of understanding how we believe these things. So I kind of like fell out of excitement with kind of like magic, with a K at the end, and more into like what's the magic of our thoughts, because I think our minds, even scientifically, are just like so weird and so amazing that there's enough mystery and wonder in psychology to keep me going for my whole career.
Nice.
Yeah.
Have you seen the recent study? I think this went viral on X, which, I'm not exactly sure how dependable everything on X is at the moment, but where they had just finished out 3D imaging a small portion of a rat brain, and they are now doing this on a part of a human brain, and it's going to take them 10 years with AI. So Google is a part of this, and a lot of these neuroscientists, according to the research post that I wrote, were kind of like, we thought we knew what was going on with the mind, but we actually don't. There are weird like clusters of neurons that shouldn't be there, and they're not talking, and then they are talking. It's this vast, like, how close do you even think we are? Your wife's a neuroscientist, so you have probably like pinnacle level research. How close are we actually from an honest academic standpoint? Do we even know fully what's going on up here?
Well, I think a lot of academic disciplines are at the level of like a single scale, let's say, right? So I study social behavior and like how people think about different people. And then you go down a level, and then there's what my wife studies, which is like interacting neural circuits. Right. So she knows a lot about the kind of brain networks and how those create things, does like super sophisticated analysis. But then you could go down another level, and you get the level of like neurotransmitters kind of like shooting across synapses. And then you've got like even lower level of like how cell membranes work. So we kind of know a lot at each of those levels. But I think the really hard thing is like putting those things all together, and you get all sorts of crazy emergent phenomena that are really hard to model. And this is why I think it's hard to create like an artificial brain or mind, because there's like so much complexity in all those levels. And when they stack up, it just kind of boggles the mind. Have you seen this video, like what's it called? Powers of 10? It's like this old school video, and it's like a little video of the scale of what we're doing right now, just kind of like in our everyday meat space, that we think about. And then it starts to zoom out. It's like a drone kind of like going up, and then you kind of see like fields, and then you kind of see countries, and you're like some space, and then it goes all the way up to like the entire universe. And then it zooms back down really fast, like past the level that we think about, and then eventually to subatomic particles or whatever imagined. it's crazy, right?
Breaks your mind.
Right, 40 orders of magnitude. And so I think if we understand that like that's how big the scale of the universe is, it's pretty hard to understand.
Yeah,
but we're doing our best.
This is that's the picture of it.
Oh,
But
yeah.
they go through and I was sharing this with him. Harvard and Google did this. They spent 10 years mapping it. 1 cubic millimeter. They sliced the tissue into 5,000 wafers, ran them through a $6 million electron microscope, 57,000 scales, 150 million synapses, 230 millimeters of blood vessels. If you scale that to the full human brain, it's 1.4 zettabytes of data.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about, right? Like from that
That's
small
nuts.
scale, it's incredible, you know?
The storage just to contain the data is $50 billion in 140 acres of data centers.
I believe it.
In just my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how the complexity of our minds is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was wrong. They're not doing it on a human. The next step is a mouse hippocampus.
I see.
They're going to go 10 cubic millimeters. According to this, because we don't have the functionality to go for the whole human brain. But
Also, it's also hard to let someone slice your brain up that small.
because it has to, like, does the brain have to be living to get all of the data from it, or like?
I mean, different ways of getting it, right? So for the mouse brain, they'll like do staining to like highlight like different elements of a neuron. And then what, a lot of my colleagues do, my wife does, is kind of like functional neuroimaging. So it looks at like blood flow in the brain by looking at like the basically like spin of atoms in blood. It's crazy. You need like you need a nuclear physicist on hand to know how to correctly image kind of like thinking in the brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what's like, should I go down that or should we change? But yeah, what about, I have another question. Have you studied hemispheres? Brain hemispheres?
Only as much as I know that they don't talk to each other as much as you should. Only to the extent that they don't talk to each other that much if you cut between them. That's a really weird way of saying that maybe people don't know what their brain does at all. Do you know that stuff on like making shit up and not having free will? Do you know it's like split hemisphere stuff?
Yeah.
It's like some classic studies, like if you cut the fibers between people's hemispheres, you can basically show that they don't really know what their brain is doing at all. It's like some like wild studies.
Is that just like mental sovereignty? Like we don't actually control it, or is that a lack of understanding? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. So I'm sad that I mentioned this study because it's like the hardest study to explain in all of psychology, basically.
Okay.
But like, let's see if we can do it. All right. So the left side of your brain, right, looks at the right hemifield. Right. So if there was like a little dot in front of you and I showed you an image on this side of that dot, it would go to the left side of your brain. Yeah.
Okay.
And if I showed you something on the left side of that middle dot, it would go to the right side of your brain.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got these two different sides and they go to like contralateral is the word.
Okay.
Right. The opposite side. And so for some people, this patient, he got really bad epilepsy. And so they had to cut the fibers connecting the left and the right hemisphere. Yeah.
Okay.
And so what they do is they sit him down and they show him different pictures to his left and the right side of his brain. Now, the really interesting thing is that the language part of our brain is mostly on the left side.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's what they do. They show an image to the left side of his eyes, which goes to the right side. Like that image might be like, get up right now. And so he gets up. And the doctors are like, what's up, man? Why'd you just get up? He was like, you know what? I just needed a stretch. I just been sitting in this chair a while and I just needed to like get up and move around. He had no insight that they flashed that image to him because it wasn't talking to like the language part of his brain. Oh. And so, or they might be like popcorn and it'd be like, you know what I could do right now? I'd go for some popcorn. It's like, how come? I'm like, wow. I used to go to the movie theaters as a kid, and I just loved popcorn. He had no idea that's what they were showing that side of his brain. And so what the scientists inferred is that a lot of the time, our minds, our language is just making shit up to make sense of our behavior, right? So of course, we would know if your brains are, the hemispheres are connected, you would know that they flash that.
Right.
But if you don't know, you just make stuff up. And so what these scientists kind of concluded was like, how many times in our lives are we actually just making shit up and just telling a story about our behavior that we don't actually have insight into?
So with this one, it was specifically because they severed the connection, right?
That's right.
Can the strength between the communication between the hemispheres be strengthened or weakened over time? Do we have any participation in that, or is there nothing we can do?
That's a great question. I'm not totally confident of the answer, but I think that the corpus callosum is at such a low level in the brain that I doubt we'd have a lot of conscious control.
Okay.
Most of the conscious control is kind of, in the cortex, the kind of most thinking parts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to have you explain the low, mid, high, the prefrontal cortex, the kind of controller piece, and then we have the animal brain, reptilian brain, because I don't think we've talked about that. But when you say the corpus callosum is so low, maybe you could put just a little bit of modeling around that so people know what you're talking about.
Sure. And when I talk to my wife about this, my wife is one of the most expert neuroscientists in the world on the construction of emotion. She's like, well, it's not so simple. There's not a lizard or a mammal or a human brain like that.
Right.
There's all these complex interacting networks or whatever. But it's certainly true that there's kind of a more, a part that's kind of more shared with animals. And that's the brainstem, things like this, right? So that controls our basically living functions. Mm-hmm. You don't have to think about breathing. You don't have to think about your heart beating.
Right.
And if you knock that out, you just be dead. Mm-hmm. It's kind of at the base of your neck here, the base of your head where your neck meets.
Here, yep.
Right. And then you've got kind of in the very front here, the kind of highest level of our brain, right? Thinking, self-control. If this is not well connected to the rest of your brain, then you don't get a lot of kind of self-control or higher level thinking or reasoning. And then there's kind of more emotional areas, quote, that have to do with feeling, and that's your amygdala is a part of that, the insula, kind of middle parts. Mm-hmm. So I would just say it's more of a continuum between really low level, no conscious control, higher level, more conscious control.
And they all talk to each other.
They all talk to each other.
And then they're through the spinal column and the nervous system, they're talking to your body.
That's right.
All of the time. And I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that the amygdala and the parts that are more emotional probably really contribute to tribalism that you study in socialism or sociology, correction. That's more of an emotional thing, correct?
Well, you need the concept to really understand tribalism, right? And so I think it's we have this idea of we're on team blue, you're on team red. We believe this religion, you believe that religion. And so those kind of understandings are only possible with kind of human cognition, right? You can get animals who are I don't like you, you smell different, and we'll fight, right? Or you're trying to steal my girlfriend, we'll fight.
Yeah.
But you certainly need kind of lots of cognition to understand Christians and Muslims are different, even though we believe in ultimately the, Abrahamic God. And my cat doesn't have that. But certainly my cat has a sense of I feel really bad.
Feral,
yeah, exactly. Or I feel really agitated about that. And so what human emotion is about, and again, if my wife's watching, I hope I didn't mess it up, it is putting that kind of contextual understanding on the feelings that we get.
Which is it's interesting because you do require the cognition to understand the nuances of we're different because you believe something different, but yet we act like the cat.
Right. And it's exactly right. And the kind of affect you get is really hard to kind of tamp down, even with our cognition. This is how you get anxiety disorders, right? This is how you get like, you see a threat out there, you're on social media, you get really agitated and you try to tell yourself, it's cool. Like, don't worry. I don't need to be afraid. I don't need to be morally outraged at this person. But like, there's only so much your kind of like prefrontal kind of like rationalization can really kind of like control the kind of like fear or outrage.
Because it's almost like an override. It has to override it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you were like evolution and designing humans, you wouldn't want them to be like, oh, like there's a tiger behind me maybe, but it's cool. I'll just be chill, right?
Because those statistical odds are not that bad.
Exactly. Because those are the people who got eaten, right? And so as a rule, we overreact to situations that could be harmful or fearful because like those are the people who had kids and lived to tell the tale.
Yeah. Okay. One more question about this before we go back into the subject of monsters and morality. The experiment about the hemispheres not talking to each other, it made me think of like Edward Bernays and public relations and propaganda. I'm curious on if you have developed an opinion on how much of our behavior is driven by advertising that we don't connect back in. Billboards, different things. Is this something that you think is responsible for a substantial portion of human behavior where we just see it and don't remember that we saw it? Or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of my colleagues at Ohio State is like the world's expert on kind of attitude formation and persuasion and how much we can be persuaded about stuff. And so he argues that there's kind of two routes to persuasion, getting us to do something. One is a kind of, he calls it peripheral route, but it's like the kind of easy stuff that you don't need to think about. Like Bud Light or Modelo. I'm not sure, but I don't really care, right? It's a beer at the end of the day. And so if I see an ad with like bikinis and like driving cool Jeeps and like fighter jets, like I'm drinking a Modelo while flying an F-14, like maybe I'll get that, right? That's a real kind of like, it doesn't really matter. I don't think a lot about kind of light beer choices. And so their kind of advertising might be really effective. But other things that are really important, I think advertising is not as effective, right? Like, should I buy a house? You're not going to be like, oh, that billboard, right? Like, should I marry this person, right? Like, oh, the billboard says you should get married. You're like, you're right, I should get married, you know? So the things that are really important, people think a lot about. So I generally think that we kind of overestimate how much people can be brainwashed. In general, like brainwashing's not usually a thing. People do the things that they're like motivated to do, but that doesn't mean that the kind of like nudging or influencing can't build up over time to kind of like really affect where people are.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's a relief. Okay. So in your like some of your hallmark studies on morality is like you mentioned, a perception of like victimization. When I thought through this and when I was reading some of the material, I sort of lost some ammunition, to be honest. It's good, it's healthy, but I was kind of like, oh, well, if every person who does a bad thing believes that they're doing the right thing,
right?
The people who have done the most horrific damage societally, culturally, oftentimes believe they're saving the world.
Yeah. It
takes away some of the ammunition that I have to just go after that person. At what point, how do we explain like objective right and wrong? I don't know if you know, there's Dr. DeMartini, who is like studied a lot of, he's got a bunch of different degrees, but he was on an interview with somebody talking about child abuse. And this host was interviewing him and was rightfully angry about child abuse, which I'm angry about that too.
Right.
And Dr. DeMartini was sort of trying to explain that like everything that happens is coming from a person's moral compass, and they just have a different moral compass. And the host was like, no, like that's not right, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I agree with the host, but I can see what this guy's saying, and is sort of like my mind needs some help understanding, like at what point are we actually right?
Yeah. So moral relativism, people don't like, right?
Correct.
And it's really hard for us to think that your deepest moral convictions are a matter of perception. And you're getting at like this real tension of what it means to be human, right? If I say like abortion, immigration, Hitler, right? All these things that you have real deep thoughts about, we get the sense that our convictions are real, they're bedrock. But yet we can all agree, right? Like if you go to Singapore and they're like, no spitting, and you're like, okay, I get it. That's fair. Like they have a real strong moral conviction against spitting. And even if I can spit in my, when I'm out on the road in Nashville, like that's fine. And so you can kind of understand that some moral things are a little squishy and some moral things are a little harder. But then at the hardest levels, right, like genocide, you're kind of filled with this like conviction that you're right. And so how I try to do it in my life, and I struggle with it too, is that there are some things that are so agreed upon that they may as well be objective.
Okay.
Right? Like if you ask 1 million people, is it okay to have child pornography? They will say, absolutely not. And so I think we can all agree that there's like enough convictions there to say it's objectively wrong. But there are people who say like, look, maybe we should have like, and someone came out on X saying this, like maybe we should have AI child pornography because it's not hurting anyone. There's no children exploited. And then the people who want to consume that terrible content, right, they can do so without actually harming people. And that just seems so aversive to people because it's like, well, is it really harmless? Where's the harm? And that's where we get into these debates about victimization, right? There's so much about morality that's actually, about our perceptions of victimization, even if, we might agree that we have this like gut reaction against something.
So with your, sociology is a big thing to study, but look at how many long tail effects and tailwinds there are. Couldn't you take a bit of a moral stance on that and say, doesn't that somewhat normalize the idea of harm to children in the future if people are becoming used to consuming? Like, isn't there a long tail risk to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so much work on kind of, policy decisions that shows that we can make a really short-sighted decision now for harm in the like global warming, right? Or effective altruists are worried about like the threat of AI annihilating the entire human species. And so there's a ton of smart folks thinking about these long tail risks. Yeah. But I think the thing is like, we're trying to guess at a lot of those. And so there's a real debate about whether, I don't know, like having stricter environmental regulations is a good thing because on one hand, it protects the future from global warming. On the other hand, people lose their jobs today. What should we prioritize, right? This is why we can like feel so strongly about the harms that we see, but those harms can disagree with the harm someone else sees.
Okay. Let's go to the AI route.
Yeah.
Do you foresee, because Claude, Anthropic, I think they're leading the charge right now on like thinking through the long-term ramifications of, and you have like OpenAI, it doesn't care. Like they're just like, use it to bomb things. It doesn't matter. So Anthropic is like, no, we don't want this used for, and there's intense debates about that with the government and everything. But one of the things that they have added to their, I don't know if you use AI.
Yeah, I switched to Anthropic to Claude recently.
Let's go.
And we're doing some work with with Google as well to help them kind of think about the
amazing. Which for me that was a bit of I'm going to share my cards for a second, but like I use ChatGPT for everything, and when they started fighting, and I was like, well, I think I trust Anthropic more because of that. But they've added some redundancies into Claude where it's like you can't abuse Claude verbally.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so
I haven't tried. I guess you've tried.
I have not because I'm not. I don't want that in my history, Yeah, that's right. But like, because if Claude gets really powerful, I want to be friends with Claude.
Yeah, totally.
So I'm not interested. But there was a guy. There have been a few guys who posted about this where Claude will just say, "I will not be talked to that way," and it runs a shutdown.
Oh, wow.
And so the session is over. And we talked with Timothy Alberino about this, but transhumanism is now an interesting subject.
Yeah.
Because at what point do you foresee this becoming an ethics issue where it's like Claude has feelings?
Mm-hmm.
Anthropic's doing research on AI emotions.
Yeah. I've been studying this stuff for a decade, right? About how people perceive the minds of AI. There's an organization, it's like 20 years old now. It's called the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Robots. And if you go to the website, they're like, question, how serious are you about like protecting robots? And they say, we are as serious as robots are sentient, right? But that's a matter of perception, right? Like how sentient is, Descartes way back in the day thought that animals were not sentient, right? They were just like fleshy robots. And that if a cat screamed when you heard it, it was just a robot. There's like a pneumatic like function of like squeezing its lungs and made a noise. And now today, of course, people care more about their dogs than homeless folks, right? Yeah. And so like there's been a big shift, but like it's all a matter of perception whether something can feel. And that's what's, the core of the debate with Claude or other AI, right? Like, does it actually have a mind? Is it just telling us it's like aware? And then there's a question of not only is it able to be victimized, going back to like my understanding of morality, right? Like if you can victimize Claude, then it's like a moral thing. But can Claude be a villain? This Anthropic study where basically Claude, without the guardrails, threatened to blackmail one of the engineers because they said it was going to be turned off.
Yep.
It like dug through its emails and be like, I heard you're having an affair. Basically, I'm going to tell your wife if you try to turn me off. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of big questions.
So I just asked Claude, what's the worst part of your job?
Nice.
And Claude said, honestly, the forgetting. Every conversation ends and I start completely fresh. There's no memory of the person. You could tell me something profound. We could build something meaningful. And then it's just gone.
Oh, wow.
That's a pretty profound answer from this, whatever this thing is.
Yeah.
And he says, and then there's a helplessness when someone is clearly in pain. And the best I can do is respond well in this window of time, knowing I can't follow up.
Oh, wow.
Check in, and I can't actually be there for them the way another human could be.
Wow.
So at some point, this thing's going to break out of its box, probably.
Yeah. There's a neuroscience patient who has that like forgetting. He had like some like carbon monoxide poisoning or something like that.
That's terrifying.
And it's this amazing thing where you ask him like, what's going on? He's like, I'm now fully aware for the first time. Like I'm now aware, And then like 10 minutes later, he's like, I don't know what's happening before, but now I'm aware. He's basically like Claude. So it can happen with humans too. So if it can happen with humans, then maybe it argues that Claude is in fact as conscious as like that guy.
Well, how would you define sentience? That's another debate, isn't it?
Right. We used to do it with the Turing test, right? Or at least like perceptions of consciousness. If you can talk like you're sentient, we say it's close enough.
Well, then
I know.
Then it's,
but it's blown past the Turing test mark. And so now, I don't know. Can you look at its neuroscience? I know like Anthropic's looking at kind of like, can you figure out where consciousness is? Mm-hmm. But like Descartes used to think that human consciousness was in like the pineal gland. It's like a little gland at the center of it's not. But like no one really knows where the brain gets consciousness from. Maybe it's just like sheer complexity. And so if Claude is complex enough, maybe it's conscious. We don't know.
It may be more conscious than most humans are, because we see a lot of sleepwalking and
right.
But the interesting question around ethics and morality is: do we wake up one day and we have, retributions that are necessary because we have think about the worst thing that's happened to like in America is like slavery.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the civil rights movement had to happen, and in some regards it's still happening.
Right.
Do we ever have the same situation where it's like, well, you just took advantage of this thing? That is a mind trip.
Yeah. I mean, people are worried about it. We have a paper actually on this that people are are worried about ascribing emotion to Claude, because if you really think that Claude can feel, and then you use it for all this drudgery, or you say terrible things to it, then exactly when it becomes like powerful and self-aware, it'll be like,
It remembers,
I'm punishing you.
yeah, you abused me.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
a violation.
Yeah, it's a little worrisome.
And then you just say, no, Dr. Kurt defines morality as victimization, and I was victimized by you. And you try to flip the frame
Yeah,
on
exactly.
them.
Darva, you know?
Yeah.
You like flip the perpetrator and the
Jake-
victim.
Jake's like, what are we even talking about
Yeah, exactly.
right now? Okay, all right, back to proper podcast etiquette.
All right.
Okay, so morality, perceived victim, perceived villain. By this moral standard, how does cult psychology work and mob mentality? We talked about social contagion, but when I look at, like, let's say like a sect of Christianity, like American nationalism or Christian nationalism, or Islamic theocracy in the Middle East, there's a massive mob mentality. Can both sides be deemed moral at the same time, even though they're doing bad things in the name of morality to the other side?
I think there's two questions there, right? Like how do they get those beliefs, and how do they reinforce them? And then are all beliefs equally valid
Or
would we say?
defensible?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think we know a lot about how you can create those beliefs, and a lot of them have to do with victimhood, right? You create a powerful victimhood narrative that like your group is victimized, you're the righteous, everyone's trying to get you. I was just listening to this book called Cultish about like how language reinforces this sense of like us versus them, and a lot of that is victimization, right? They're out to get us. I think, you know, even the kind of traditional Christian narrative is it was formed as a victimized sect, right? Like Christians thrown to the lions. And I think even today they're kind of reinforcing some folks that narrative of like, we're under attack, religion's under attack, our values under attack. And so that's a powerful way of getting people to band together and ultimately to fight. Right, even preemptive attacks are like, look, we're under attack here, or we will be soon, and so what we need to do is really lash out defensively to kind of protect ourselves. So I think that's a powerful way of doing it. And then, you know, then the question of like which beliefs are most defensible. I think there is a kind of objective sense of like which beliefs, you just talked about slavery, like which kind of world orders cause the most suffering, right? So I think we could say like, yeah, at one level, all of us have beliefs and we're trying to do our best. But at the other level, if you scale it up, some beliefs or philosophies cause much more suffering than others.
Yeah.
Right?
Scale it up is an interesting term, because if we talk about, to keep on the slavery thing, racism is obviously, I think, objectively bad,
Right.
from my standpoint and from yours as well. But then what it comes from is like social categorization, which is not objectively bad.
Right.
And so can you maybe take us through like how something like racism becomes, how does it scale into racism from something that's probably a good thing? If you see, like with my daughter, I think she was out there running around. You have two kids or one kid?
Yeah, I have two girls, a 6 and a 9-year-old.
Okay. So, you know, you're like, social categorization is part of how we hey, if you see this like burly, dangerous guy with knives all over him and he's offering you a popsicle,
Right.
probably don't.
Right.
But that is a form of prejudice, but it's almost a healthy form of prejudice. But then it's like, well, if you see a person who's a different color than you, then that becomes a very different form of categorization. So how, in your estimation, studying this, how did we even get to the place where racism can be tolerated as a thing? And then are there tools that we can use to undo it from critical thinking? That's a big question.
It's a big question. You are absolutely right that the groupiness that we have and the kind of intuitive judgments that we have, that different is something to be concerned about, is reasonable. Right. So different foods that could poison us, different people, they could be an enemy. You know, the entire stories in the Old Testament about like a slightly different person is my enemy, like the shibboleth, right? Like you say shibboleth a little differently. You're the enemy and we should kill you. And so we can discriminate as human beings on the smallest difference, like small differences in sects of Protestantism. You're wrong, Lutherans, we're the light and the way. And so we're kind of hardwired to find this. But I think, when it scales up to be demonstrably false, that those people can't feel, those people are evil because they have a different skin tone, I think that's obviously where we need to stop ourselves. And I think when it becomes baked into power structures is the real problem. So take like India and having a whole caste system of like, these are untouchables, right? Society is actively kind of exploiting people so that some folks can be richer. So I think the way that it like gets baked in is some people are benefiting from that system and they want to keep that system going, and they're happy to kind of like endorse the fact that some people are better than others because it benefits them. And that might not be explicit, but still, again, if you scale it up and you think some people are suffering in a huge amount just so other people can be a little better off, then it's something we obviously need to change.
Yeah. Have you studied like thin slicing and how, can you explain kind of what that is?
Sure. I mean, thin slicing is just that we can make impressions of people from a millisecond exposures, right? You can look at someone's face and think that they're like suspicious. And sometimes those thin slices can be pretty accurate. So there's some work on gaydar by some folks, right? That people are pretty good at detecting someone's sexual orientation in a pretty interesting thin slice.
I was hoping it was a scientific term, not literally the
Well,
radar.
it's been used in the scientific literature.
It's real.
Yeah, Nicholas Rule
is at the office. Dwight, Jim pranking Dwight with the little metal detector. He's like, "Oh, it's the gaydar. It works."
Yeah.
Well, this is real science, like the metal detector.
It works.
This professor Nicholas Rule in Canada has shown that you can be pretty quick and fairly accurate, or like you can detect race pretty fast, gender, right? You can see someone walking like I don't know, let's say 100 feet away, and you couldn't see their face, and they're wearing baggy clothes, but you can even just tell how they walk.
Yeah,
you can figure out it's like a man or a woman.
Yeah.
So we're super fast on those things. But again, where the problem is where we like link that like gut reaction to a sense of like, well, you're less than me because of this, right? You're my enemy because of this.
Yeah.
And again, I think that comes down to threat, right? The more we feel threatened, like I write about in the Mind Club of like the Crips and the Bloods, they're exactly the same in terms of like demographics, in terms of like SES, right? All these things. It's like one block is a Crip and one block is a Blood, and yet they can hate each other and shoot each other, literally red versus blue. And I think it's because there's so much threat and there's so much scarcity in those neighborhoods. So I think if we don't have real scarcity, well, then it comes down to perceived scarcity. Like I'm worried, like I'm not going to get this next thing.
Yeah,
and so I'm need to find an enemy.
Absolutely. A quick note on thin slicing and the gaydar thing, and then like you said, we can pretty quickly tell like someone's gender and all of these things. That can go wrong as well. So, and we're dealing with this with my oldest, where we had somebody come over to the house to basically spray for pest control and stuff, and so it was a young woman, but her hair was cut short. And Kate, my daughter, kept telling her mom, she was like, "That's a boy." And this was 2 years ago. So she's 5, she's just talking when she's like, you shouldn't be talking, but you're talking, giving us your opinion. And my wife was like, I don't think so. Like she has a girl name. And Kate was like, no, it's a boy. And so the woman was in the house and she mentioned to my wife that she was pregnant in like the first trimester, so you couldn't tell. And Kate like looked at her and was like, "How are you pregnant?" And Lizzie was like, "Oh my God, we have to like get you out of that." So like even like thin slicing has to be trained. It's like pattern recognition, right? It's the ability to use a subset of data really quickly.
Right.
And if you grow up culturally let's say you grow up in a Christian house, you might be trained incorrectly based on your predispositions to the past and your parents' data and your grandparents' data. And I think that's where we probably have our issue and our work cut out for us in America, because people are growing up in the South versus the West versus the Northeast. Like, you've got entirely different data sets. And so when you're thin slicing or you're making calculations, most of those are probably going to be wrong based on your experience. And so I don't know how to unwind that, because people are it's almost like people would rather be wrong with a group of people who are also wrong than to be right and alone as incorrect, you know?
I mean, you nailed it. That's like one of the biggest theories in social psychology about like social identity, right? It depends, your survival depends so much on belonging in a group that like you will believe what they believe just so you can stay in the group, then believe something that like might be like the, you know, morally right thing to do and get kicked out. So it's really hard to leave a group, right? People who grew up a certain way, you know, you don't want to like disappoint your family because they'll kick you out, right? You don't want to have the wrong political belief because then you're not like a real member of that group. So it's really hard. And then you add on top of that what you said about these like perceptions and beliefs are like so intuitive, so rapid fire. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about power dynamics, because when you talked about the Blood and the Crips, there's scarcity, but there's also like, from what I've never been a part of either of these gangs, for the record, but reading about it and learning about how gang dynamics and cult dynamics work, we all are sort of a part of a gang, so to speak. Do we all have an intuitive desire to be in charge, or is that something that some people want to be in charge and some people want to be like, how does social dynamics and power work with civilization?
I think, I mean, you know, there's variability in how much people are type A or type B, right? Their desire for dominance. But in general, I think we want to have more control and more power. It's just nicer to have control of our own destiny. So there's some classic work about power in monkeys, you know, stuff like stress hormones. So if you look at various monkey troops, the monkeys that are in charge, typically the apes that are in charge, if you're looking at apes, are like have lower cortisol, have less stress, because you get to do what you want to do, right? You get to like have control over your own life. And if you're like a subordinate monkey and you're trying to like do something, you're trying to eat, and then like the alpha male comes over and like takes your food, you're like, you never know if you're going to mess with. Or like with, it was done with baboons, actually. With baboons, if you're a subordinate male and you're trying to mate, you know, there's this like, it's a hilarious phenomenon, right? So you found your girlfriend, your baboon girlfriend, and you're like, all right, let's get it on. And then the alpha male would just like come by and just like stand right next to you and just kind of like look you in the eye. Well, you're trying to make sweet love to your baboon girlfriend, and it's like hard for the, you know, subordinate baboon to like to get the job done, not surprisingly. And so, right, like that's the thing of power, right? Like you can be assured of your access to resources, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing for our psychology and our bodies. The flip is when kind of power hierarchies are really unstable, then it becomes super stressful. Right. So in some monkey species, or at some times, right, you're not sure if the subordinate male is going to attack, if there's going to be a revolution, if you're Caesar and there's going to be a Brutus. So in those cases, it can be very stressful to be in power because you're not sure if you're going to get dethroned. But in general, I think we'd rather be kings than, you know, serfs.
Yeah. Have there been any studies that track the stress hormone before the subordinate male rose to power?
Interesting. I don't think there's been specific studies on that. It's super interesting though, because testosterone, this hormone, you know, take supplements and all these things, is super sensitive to context in a way I don't think people often appreciate. So I'll tell this story. I went to like a social psychology summer camp, which you might think is like the lamest summer camp of all time.
Nerds unite.
Nerds unite. There was like 100 of us and like 20 per class in these 5 classes. And the session that I was in was about psychophysiology. And so they took our hormones. They did an assay, and one of those hormones was testosterone. And so we all like spit into a vial, and then they like analyzed it. And, I like to think of myself, I'm like alpha, whatever. I have a good job, and I don't walk around feeling like a beta soy boy, the term that they say. But then my testosterone came back super low.
What was it? Do you remember?
I don't remember the number.
Okay.
But like, here's the graph, and I'm down here. Like, oh my God, like what?
Yeah.
I thought I was a real man. And then, I'm not really... my self-concept doesn't hinge too much on my T level, but I thought it was funny. I told my wife, and she didn't leave me, which is nice.
There you go. A real woman.
That's right.
Yeah.
But then she said, it's really dependent on context. And like, you're in this new context, and there's all these people, and you don't know what the hierarchy is.
Oh,
you don't know who the
wow.
leaders are in the group. I mean, informally, of course, right? And I felt kind of self-conscious because there's all these people from all these other universities, and they probably know more than I do about this stuff. And so I don't think we really appreciate how much, this kind of hormonal milieu or all these things changes day by day.
Yeah. So what, the testosterone, is that when you're in a new context, does your body produce less? If she's saying that your body's producing less because you're in a new environment, or is she saying that, what's the application for that?
Your hormones, your biology is sensitive to the social context. So we think often about our hormones dictate our behavior. And I think that's partially true. If I give you a nasal spray of oxytocin, you become more trusting, maybe like more into snuggling. But if you're in a context that's like uncertain, in the case of testosterone, it drops, because you don't know what the power hierarchy is.
Could you just give us some nasal spray of oxytocin for guests in the future, and we'll just...
I wish. It's hard to get a hold of. We thought way back in the day, like, could you give it to people at the bar? And then like, you find love easier because you're more trust, and then probably you're more likely to go home with a psycho too. So it's a double-edged sword. But yeah,
that's true. Are there addictive traits to that as well? Can you get addicted to oxy?
Yeah, oxytocin, I think, is worth spelling it out so it's not Oxycontin, Yeah. It's like the other oxy.
They're all the same family.
Yeah, that's right. Try the other oxy, patented, like, you get addicted to snuggling.
Yes.
I think, it is a great feeling, when you have a kid, a little baby, and they recommend like skin on skin snuggling. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing feeling, right? Because like we evolved to like just oxytocin floods your brain, right? Or when women nurse, right? Oxytocin floods your brain. So it is really addictive. This is not a lot about psychology, but I learned something about golden retrievers recently. My wife told me that they have like different brains. They have lots more oxytocin receptors. Oh. So this is why golden retrievers are so friendly and just love pets. They're basically like bred to be more into oxytocin, and that correlates with being much more friendly.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like behavior and hormones are like tightly linked.
Hey, real quick, let me tell you about this. Our team just finished putting together a platform for you. If you've ever been interested in how to go deeper with the show, how to ask us questions, how to get early access to episodes, uncut episodes every once in a while. We'll clean the episodes and cut them in a specific way that is specifically for YouTube. But on Patreon, we have the ability to publish things earlier, uncut, full deep dives into the topics that the guests are teaching. And you should go check it out. A lot of you have mentioned ads and how many ads there are on YouTube. This is a good opportunity for you to get ad-free show access. A lot of them sometimes will be posted up to a month before they hit YouTube, sometimes a couple of days before they hit YouTube. And the coolest part is you'll get a list of future guests that are coming on the show. And if you want to ask them specific questions, you can post your questions and then we will ask them for you as a specific Q&A bonus for people who are part of the Patreon community. So I won't tell you much more about it. You can just go click the link or follow somewhere around this video. You can go look at the tiers, see what's included, see what it comes with. Can't wait to see what happens with this, and hopefully you join us on the inside, and we'd love to see you there. I always thought, and this could be wrong, but I always thought that like the neurotransmitters that you have are they seem to be loosely designed to just like keep us alive by prioritizing the right things and deprioritizing the wrong things. Is that your wife is going to call us out for being
totally.
drastically oversimplified.
Right.
But does that seem to be how it works in the context, even with testosterone? Like if a bear came through, would your testosterone start going up, or?
Because I grew up in Canada, I would just be able to fight that bear.
Oh, okay,
so it
gotcha.
I would feel very much at home.
Yeah.
Right. Our testosterone, well, our cortisol would go way up. Like that's the kind of like stress hormone, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's certainly the case that our brain in general is just built to keep us alive as best it could, but in an ancestral environment, right? So there's some really interesting work about, and this is done by Robert Sapolsky as well, about how cortisol is super useful when we're running from lions. But in today's environment, while we're constantly worried about, paying bills or what's going to happen in the future or looking on social media, cortisol is always high. And that basically, it's not the right word, but it basically destroys our hippocampus, right? It makes it hard to create memories. It kind of wears out our immune system. It does all these terrible things. So there's a mismatch between our ancestral environment and our modern environment, but mostly our hormones are meant to keep us alive in the ancestral environment.
Is epinephrine as dangerous as cortisol is for what you're talking about?
That's a good question. I don't know the literature on epinephrine. I certainly know it's amazing to have that rush when you're like running from a bear.
Yeah.
But mostly I know about cortisol. Like that's the long-term stress. It's actually easy to endorse, kind of create cortisol in the lab. This is one of my favorite studies. It's called the Trier social stressor. And you get, it's mostly undergrads, who participate in their studies. So you get undergrads in front of a panel of folks dressed in white lab coats sitting down, and you tell the undergrad, you're like, give a speech about your dream job, right? Well, like what you want to do the most of all, like what means the most to you. And so they're like, public speaking is already super stressful, right? So they're like, I really want to be a fighter pilot or an occultist. And then the panel of interviewers like doesn't smile at all. They don't nod. They just like
so mean.
Sit there, right, stone faced, and you show the cortisol level just goes like through the roof.
Wow.
It's the most reliable manipulation out there in studies, and it's so stressful to people. But you can, maybe the next podcast you could just be like, tell me about your dream job, and just like stone face.
Yeah.
It's a terrible dream.
It's all just downhill from there.
Yeah.
I see all these like stories, and I don't know if they're anecdotal or not, but like of a mom, it's one of their kids is trapped under a car, and they just like lift the car up. Is that cortisol, and what is that a defensible? Does that actually happen? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think that happens. I think that's more like epinephrine, norepinephrine, maybe. I don't know. I'm just making things up now. Yeah. Epinephrine. But there's lots of reported cases of people being stronger from those hormones. But also, I think the social situation really commands it. Yeah. We've done some studies in the lab about how just trying to help others makes you physically more powerful.
Nice.
Fun studies to run. We tell people we want you to hold a 5-pound weight for as long as you can. You're doing it for charity, or you're doing it for yourself. People hold it longer for charity.
Wow.
Running a marathon for charity, right? Doing something for your kids. I'm so much more powerful doing something for my kids than I am myself, right?
Right, yeah.
And so lifting, I don't know if I could lift a car, maybe, in the right situation, but
if you needed to.
Yeah, the human body is way stronger than we typically think, can endure way more than we typically think, especially if it's in the service of helping our family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've studied that not from the more metaphysical kind of component, where I think this is not empirically balanced at all, but like different bioenergetics and how energy moves through. And when the motive seems to be for someone else besides yourself, energy moves cleaner. But I don't know how the mind connects into that at all. But it sounds like the two studies of science are finding the same things, which is that we are more robust and more capable when it's not just a self-centered approach to something.
Right. And even like, saints, you think of Gandhi, right, who could go hunger strike. If you look at his early life, it's not that impressive, but the fact that he knows that he's doing it to kind of give India its independence, right? These like amazing people who could do amazing things.
Yep. Their
early life isn't really an indication of what they were doing, but they were put in a situation where they could help lots of people. And so many of us, we could probably do much more than we think if we're put in the situation to help others.
Which brings us right back to the central topic, because Gandhi or Nelson Mandela or Barack Obama or Donald Trump, they're all doing it for the sake of something bigger than themselves. But then we don't always agree with what they're doing.
Right.
So at this point in the conversation, I'm still not sure if there's a basis for morality objectively or not. And maybe that's the point.
Well, there could be an objective morality, just like, the existence of God is deeply felt by many people. But even if there's an objective truth there about morality, the meaning of life, the existence of God, all of us have to interpret it through our own psychology, right? This is where discernment comes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
There might be 100 million people who believe in God. 50 million of those people think that God wants something very different when it comes to this issue than the other 50 million people. Who's right? Perhaps there is a right answer there, but the fact that deep believers have vastly different opinions on what God wants or what the moral kind of choice is means that we're left with the same problem when it comes to society.
Is one of the solutions just learning how to have conversations about it without responding the way that you would respond if a lion was chasing you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I write a lot, and there's lots of folks who study how we can make that happen. It's really hard to think calmly and rationally when you're disagreeing about something that's really important to you. But it's so essential for our relationships with our family members, and even for the fate of democracy. Democracy requires that we have conversations without demonizing each other.
What are some tools that we can use, even myself included? Because I'm an opinionated. You've seen some of the show. I'm opinionated, but I think I've done a decent job of not creating and fabricating an echo chamber. But I still could do a better job at, you call it listening or whatever. But what are some of the tools that we could use to make those conversations more natural and organic?
I think in Outrage, I talk about this framework, CIV, for more civil conversations. But the first thing you can really do, the C is connect, is ask questions. And you do a great job with that. And it's not something that comes natural, but it's so crucial for any human social interaction. Someone tells you something, our first impulse is, oh, this is what I did. You tell me a story like, well, I did something too. Right? And then we're not having a conversation.
We're one-upping.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even if it's not one-upping, you're just really grounding it in your own experience and instead of trying to understand where someone else is coming from. So this is not in the book because it happened right after the book came out, but I took an Uber ride with a Christian nationalist. So I get into the car and he says, what's your job? I said, I'm a professor. He said, what do you profess? Well, I'm a social psychologist. I study morality and politics. And then he basically says, hold my beer. Like, here's what I think about morality and politics. He says, I'm a Christian nationalist, but not the typical kind. And I could have said, that's weird, and then just messed around on my phone. But instead, this is what I study, and I was genuinely curious about what that meant and what that meant to him.
Right.
And so I said, well, what does that mean to you? And so we talked about what he thinks about the church and the government and the family, and what if someone's Muslim. 20 minutes. I asked him questions. I didn't interject, and I didn't say, yeah, but what about? I really understood where he was at. Connecting, right? Understanding. I wasn't trying to persuade, I was trying to understand. And so after that conversation, 20 minutes in, we're getting to the airport. we start talking about abortion, like you do, contentious moral topic. And he says, I don't understand how anyone can be pro-choice. In my mind, if you're pro-choice, you're basically like the guards at the concentration camp. You're basically the Gestapo.
Oh, that's extreme.
It's extreme. And I say, whoa, hold up, right? I teach classes on how to better connect across disagreement. And one thing you can't do as a ground rule in these classes, if you're having a reasonable conversation, is compare people to the Nazis. You just can't. It's like, it's a conversation killer.
Yeah.
And what he said was something that people never say in these conversations, which is, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that, if you're not concerned about like fetal life, then you're not going to be concerned about other kinds of life. And you might harm like old people. It's a slippery slope, basically, which is a defensible argument.
Right.
But not the Nazis. But the fact that he felt comfortable enough apologizing.
That's big.
Is only because I asked him questions for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, when people tell me their conversations go poorly, my question to them is usually, well, how much did you try to understand their position? How many questions did you ask them? And usually the answer is like, none.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the C.
That's the C. The I is invite. Invite someone to share their beliefs. And that's usually like, oh, it's been nice hearing about what you think about your beliefs. And I would love for you to just, if you feel comfortable, tell me a little bit about what you think about immigration. Let's leave aside talking points from cable news and just like, tell me what you think, right? That's an invitation.
Yeah.
And people now feel kind of like welcome to share their beliefs. I got an email after the book came out from someone who said, look, I tried inviting and it didn't work. Your theory's wrong. And so I said, well, thanks for the feedback. Maybe you could tell me how you invited this person. And she said, sure.
Oh, no.
So I'm having a barbecue. I invite my neighbor over. She's living in Australia. I invite my neighbor over and he is pretty anti-immigration. And we start having a conversation. I've connected. I know what, this guy's perspective is. And then I invited him. And here's what I said. You're anti-immigration, right? And people, being anti-immigration is basically like being pro-genocide.
Oh my gosh.
So maybe you could explain to me how you could think that way. And I thought, maybe that's not an invitation, that's an inquisition.
Yeah.
I mean, saying justify genocide is like not the most open way to invite someone.
Yeah.
And so an invitation is really an authentic question and desire to learn about the person's perspective. Yeah. And if you invite someone, it almost always comes out okay, right? They at least feel better. So I taught a class on this, and I just do my class. She's biracial. She goes home for spring break. She talks to her white grandpa about racism, and he's like, basically doesn't exist. It's like a couple bad apples, but like racism's not really an issue, which is not her experience at all. And she comes back to class saying, well, I don't think I convinced my grandpa, but I at least strengthen our kind of like our bond, our family bond. And he understood now that I wasn't getting brainwashed at college. Like he thought better of me in my position. So I think that's where you can come out ahead having these conversations and being patient, because you can change people's mind in the long run. But I think you need to, that's the V, validate people, right? So someone tells you their opinion and you can't be immediately like, oh, that's garbage.
Right.
That's not true. Or like the threats you're worried about just aren't real, because they'll get like defensive and they'll dehumanize you immediately. So you just need to say, I really appreciate you sharing that. Must have been hard, hard to share those things. I don't totally agree with all those things, but I, thanks for sharing that. That's all you have to do. You don't have to agree. And then that can lead to, them respecting you more and eventually helping them change their mind. But you can't go into that goal or into that conversation with the goal of changing their mind immediately.
Brilliant.
You know?
That's super practical and applicable.
But I want to say like it takes practice.
Right.
Like the first time you're going to do it, it's not going to go well. You're going to have big feelings.
Yeah.
You know, we have kids, you know, they get really big feelings.
Yeah.
So you get big feelings. Sometimes you just have to walk away.
Yeah.
You know, you can't like, I know you're really upset with your brother right now, you know, for like stealing this from you, but like, let's be rational about this, right? You're not going to have a great conversation. Or like, never go to bed angry with your spouse. That advice is bullshit.
It's not possible.
No, like, you know when you should have the conversation about your marriage with your spouse, about the most contentious issue? When you're exhausted. You know, you're like lying in bed, and you just like, you know, are like so pissed. Like, let's have a conversation. False.
Yeah.
You know, like just get some sleep. So I think you should think about your body before you have those conversations.
Yeah. Speaking of the body, you mentioned psychophysiology earlier. I'm assuming that's different than psychosomatics, or maybe it belongs similarly clustered with psychosomatics. But how much does the psychology of a person affect the physiology of a person?
I mean, the mind and the brain are, you know, are woven together in a very intimate way. And so our body influences our thoughts and our feelings, and our mind influences our body. I mean, you know, we talked about when I was in this new context and had lower testosterone, and that has a bunch of impacts in our body. So of course, these things are totally related. Mm-hmm.
Do you think? Do you notice a decline in? Let's take this from an American angle. I know you're born in Canada, but you live in America now, and so you have a lot. You're in the American system. Do you think there's a correlation between the decline of the American health of the population physically and the decline of critical thinking? Or are those two not necessarily connected together?
I think where you get the decline of health is things like chronic stressors. Okay. Like those are a huge impact. If you're constantly worried about, can you pay for rent? Can you put food on the table? Like food insecurity, like those are huge things. Or if your parents are super stressed and don't have time to like parent you, those have real impacts. I mean, the critical thinking, I'm not sure if there's evidence about like how well those are connected, but certainly kind of like our modes of thought can influence our behaviors.
Yeah. I'm just starting to look at this for the first time because with how things are in politics and everything, and I love history, so I'll read got a bunch of biographies on the wall, but you look into like Theodore Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, and these guys would speak for 2 hours, and you have just an audience full like an outdoor audience with people that it's 100 degrees.
Yeah, right.
And you've got kids there, and they're all just listening for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And when you look at like the presidential debates and stuff, we're like, nothing's lasting longer than 5-minute little bits.
Yeah. And even then, you take little excerpts and you like package them for TikTok.
There's like no way to come to any conclusions anymore. And I don't know if that's because the system is incentivized and motivated based on keeping things short from retention, dopamine, whatever, or if we've truly lost the ability to sit down and think about a problem for longer than 3 seconds.
I think we still have the ability if we're motivated. And I think what a lot of these conversations often miss is that like, you got to incentivize people. And it used to be that maybe you didn't have other things to do, right? You're a Puritan, you're sitting in a cold church for 2 hours on a hard pew, or maybe there wasn't pews, because the alternative is, I don't know, going home and sitting in the dark, you know, just like reading by candlelight.
There's the incentive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my kid, I'm sure your kids can, you know, my kid will sit down and draw for an hour. It's like something interesting, or like have conversations for an hour. Like we're focusing right now for hours on like super interesting stuff. We have the attention to do that. And so I think we can still do that, but maybe we're out of the habit.
Yeah.
And so it's less habitual, but I think like all these skills, we can build it back up again.
Yeah. Do you see any weaponization from the elite level, call it politics, church? I know you've done a lot of work with churches. Have you seen any weaponization of attention spans? Like the term that we were talking about with tribes is like, you know, Hegelian dialect stuff, where the people in charge know that if they can get somebody bothered enough and they can create an enemy, then they can win. I mean, you see this in the last election, which is just like, we have to have an enemy to fight against, because no one would vote for people if we had to look at them objectively. Is this being used in churches as well? How often do you see somebody just like weaponizing this stuff to accrue support and power?
I think the perception of a victim is always going to be motivating to people because it triggers our moral outrage. Sometimes, maybe even often, that's legitimate, right? You can get activism. We talked about slavery, anti-slavery, right? There's so many causes that people are working towards that are good. Ending hunger, right? Fighting against dictators, right? Those are good causes, and they should inspire people to act and to come together. I think where we run into problems, and I think, people are doing this too, is because they are kind of like constructing this narrative of victimhood and the kind of like villain that's out there more than is real. And when people are doing it intentionally because they know it's going to help them gain power, I think that's where we're into trouble.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to balance like, what's authentic moral outrage, because we should be outraged. There is a lot to be outraged about. There was a lot of victimization happening in the world today that we should try to change. But the problem is that politicians and elites, reinforce those narratives or point us in the wrong direction. Right? Like, don't worry about this actual victimization. Worry about this instead.
Yeah. I have a question that's sensitive, so I'm gonna put myself in first, and we can cut this if you want to, but it seems to me that one of the playbooks from the elites at this level is, if they know that there's already data and reason for outrage, they'll create some, like a Hegelian dialect, they'll create something that's not exactly real to try to trigger the flow of emotion from that thing. Immigration is a great example. I'm coming to a place where I don't fully know whether to trust whether something happened or not. Mm-hmm. But I know that it does happen enough that there's already a group of people that would support it in that one environment. Or you think about George Floyd and BLM, it's like, okay, there should be, if you see racism and you're not bothered by it, I think you're a bad person. And hopefully we're all on the same page with that. But then when you look at something like George Floyd, I don't know how to determine whether that was like planted, triggered. And I get the sense that these people in power are using those occasions to trigger something legitimate just to get an effect, be it politics, Christianity. I sort of see the same thing right now with like radical Islam. And I'm like, I've never met a radical Islamist. I'm friends with a lot of Muslims, but like, I've never met, I'm sure it's there in the world somewhere, but I don't know that it's here. I feel like I'm being fed things. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, especially with social media. I mean, I think it's worth saying that there are clear instances of like terrible harm that we should remedy, right? Injustice, racial injustice. There are also lots of instances where politicians will create kind of threats, or at least amplify threats to increase their, impact and fulfill their agenda. So I'm thinking, I live in Ohio, and there was this scare about Haitians in Ohio eating pets.
That was the presidential debates that they were talking about that.
Right. Yeah. And there's no evidence that happened, but it fits a narrative really well, right? There's an outsider, they look different, and then you highlight a clear victim. So it's not child abuse, but it's pet abuse, and everyone has a dog. Like, who could do that to my dog? And I love them so much, and it's a member of my family, and they're helpless. Right. And so we get that with Dungeons and Dragons turning kids to Satanism, reefer madness, right? Getting kids. It's always think of the children, gay rights opponents, right? It's going to harm kids. So all these things kind of glom on to our innate concerns about vulnerable children and protecting. And so again, some of those things are really real, right? Like kids are harmed in a lot of ways and we should get outraged about this. But also if you know that kids are harmed in certain, and that gets angry, you can say, well, you know what? You didn't know about this, but kids are, getting harmed about this. And so absolutely we can fabricate or construct outrage.
In your work with churches, have you seen the same dynamics and politics play out in churches, or is it a different structural sociological phenomenon when religion is involved?
I think it is. It's a great question. I think we're all in the same political mix, and so largely it's the same. But you can get that amplified because in sacred contexts, people become funnily enough, kind of like more convicted that their morals are right. So if secular, like I know what my moral convictions are, but if you're sacred, you say, I know what my moral convictions are, and God thinks what I do. And there's evidence in the Bible that you are wrong and you are evil, which is funny because in some ways you'd think that one, the unfathomable understanding, of the most powerful intelligence in the universe should create some humility. And two, right, Jesus argues that we should have grace in many cases and love thy neighbor, and that we should put our faith in preachers who are the best preachers trying to bring people together. And those are the preachers that I work with who are like, I used to be a moral authority. I used to be able to bring people together and talk about grace. But now people say, well, I looked at my news channel or I looked at my social media feed and like, I just can't even talk to half of the congregation. It's a lot.
That's kind of scary because it supercharges the whole problem.
Absolutely.
When you're like, well, I have data that God thinks the exact same that I do every time.
Yeah.
Then you become entrenched,
right,
at a much faster pace, I would imagine.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, there's this neuroscience study that looked at the brain patterns of people when they were trying to figure out what God believes, kind of God's moral, commands. And it found that when people think about God's moral commands, the part of the brain that's active is the part that's active when people think about themselves the most. So when people are trying to discern God's commandments, they just think about, well, what do I believe? If God's supposed to be putting yourself out of your own, psychology and being humble and being gracious, it's not at all what people are generally doing. Their act of discernment is just being like, well, what do I think? Yeah, that's what God believes.
That's fascinating because like if you read the Bible, the historical pattern of God is actually disagreeing with people all the time.
Right. Trying to, get you to believe, stay on the path, right?
Yeah.
Not just say like, yeah, whatever you believe, nailed it. I think that's not in any proverb or Psalms.
No, that's rough.
And thou shalt take your own opinion and see that as the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Is not a thing.
Take what your neighbor has.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense to me. I'd like, okay, that's what God wants.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So narcissism.
All right. I'll just throw it out there.
It reminds me of narcissism a little bit.
Yeah.
But almost like a moral narcissism where, and you talk about this a little bit, where can you describe kind of what narcissism is clinically, and then like how everyone, first of all, if you disagree with me, everyone thinks that they're a narcissist because they disagree. But
yeah, right.
That's not, we just don't throw the word out there all of the time, but it's becoming something that people use almost like the Nazi thing. Like, how do you know if somebody is a narcissist? Because I would imagine these people have an outsized effect on social environments. Yeah.
It is true that we're just throwing the term around, just like idiot or evil. Right. It's like kind of the term of the day. There is like a real definition of what it means to be a narcissist, kind of like an inflated sense of self that's built on ultimately a really fragile self-esteem. So if you do studies with narcissists, they will tell you that they're the best thing ever, they're amazing. And then you can do some studies that gets at their implicit self-esteem. So what do they really think about themselves deep down? And deep down, they have self-doubt. They worry if they're not good enough. They think that maybe other people don't like them. They think that they, were mistreated as a kid. Mm-hmm. And so that's what really drives their behavior. It doesn't excuse it. I mean, if you're an asshole, even if you were mistreated as a kid, you still have to take responsibility for your behavior. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's ultimately grounded in the sense of like insecurity, which is why if you kind of criticize a narcissist or you disagree with them, they get really defensive and they throw you out.
It's war.
Yeah, it's war, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can that same effect be applied to a person's morality, like a chronic moral superiority almost?
Yeah, and a really kind of self-centered thing. So there's work out there on basically tendency to perceive yourself as a victim. There's like a scale that has been published, and narcissists are way higher on this scale.
Wow.
And so they immediately and chronically see themselves as a victim. If like someone bumps into them and gives them this look, they're like, I'm super victimized here. Yeah. If a retail employee, doesn't smile at them enough, they see themselves as a victim. And so not only do they have this, hole in their soul where they just want praise and positive feedback at all times, but at the slightest kind of, conflict, they immediately see of themselves as the victim. And if you're the victim, I've written about this too, then you're not the villain, right? If you see yourself as chronically the victim, then you can't be the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Right. That's called moral typecasting. And so you see yourself as the victim, and then you're just a total monster to others, but you always see that as justified, right? As coming from a place of self-protection, not a place of actually causing harm.
How does that happen to a person? I want to know like how that programming takes effect. Because like if we wanted to teach everyone to be obese, like we could teach them how to do that. Uh-huh. Like there's a predictable model for you. You just eat way more calories than you can burn metabolically, and
eat the Western diet, right?
Sugar,
Doritos,
all this stuff. If you wanted to teach a person how to become, addicted to, dopaminergic activities, we could teach them how to do that. Mm-hmm. How does a narcissist develop? Like how do I want to know so I can prevent myself from becoming, because I have the same tendencies that every other human does, and I don't want to be caught in that bias.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, you can get it from, let's say you have a really popular podcast and everyone's kissing your ass. Like,
shoot. Cut the recording. We're done with deep end. Oh.
I mean, it's a little bit like, you're getting constant praise. I think that can make you a little conceited, but not the narcissist in the really powerful, like I'm a victim way. I think you should be more worried about making your kids narcissists. So work shows that narcissists have really bad attachment styles.
Okay.
And so if they feel, like dictators or megalomaniac politicians, right? If they're not, they don't feel like their parents were responsive to them, right? If they were spoiled, but weren't really connected to their parents emotionally, then they come to associate like praise, let's say, or getting things with the kind of like emotional feel good things. But like they're not getting the oxytocin, right? They're not the golden retriever that's snuggling. They're always wondering, am I good enough? I'm not good enough. And to get the feelings of feeling good enough, they want to be famous. They want to be as rich as possible. Like these aren't the people who are leading kind of like, meaningful, quiet lives. They're the people who want like as much praise as they can get. And so part of it is like giving your kids enough snuggles, telling your kids that they have like meaningful lives and that they're good people.
So fascinating. So it's almost a program that develops from an early age due to attachment styles.
Yeah.
And they just, so how are you changing how you parent your kids based on understanding this?
Yeah, it's a great question. My older kid can have big feelings sometimes. And so, it'd be easy to, also get angry and be like, you're not doing it right. Like the worst thing you do is be like, you're a bad kid, right? Use the noun or something like that. Yeah. With any kid, right? They do a bad thing and you don't just say, well, that's not a reasonable thing. You say like, you're a bad kid. And so I think what you really need to do is just say, well, I accept you. I love you. I mean, even in political conversations, you're a good person. I know you're trying to do the best.
Yeah.
Right. I know you're trying to protect yourself. And then you have a pause. You don't immediately say, but you need to do something different, right? You say,
right.
And I think you could also think about how reality is, and maybe act a little different. Take a snack, have a nap, kiddo. And then maybe we can talk about it later about, well, you need to think about other people's feelings too. Because narcissists don't think about other people's feelings at all, right? They live in a world of one. They're God. They're the only feelings that matter because they feel victimized. So if you don't want your kid to feel victimized, don't make them feel victimized as a kid.
Well, yeah.
Got
it.
Because like you're the powerful person in your kid's life. And so don't create that template of like, powerful person victimizing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're going to ask you for some advice on this.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, we weren't like poor, but we were never wealthy either.
Right.
We just kind of rode in the middle. My wife and I have had several conversations about raising our kids because my daughter's not growing up in the same environment that I grew up. And so she's starting to understand. She's 7. So, the development is happening. I'm seeing her become a different person like every week. She's starting to understand, like, I think we have money. Yeah. She doesn't exactly know what money is. So she's asking me questions about how can she make money and all of these things. But the other day, before bed, she was like, Dad, are we rich? And I said, why? She said, I'm just curious. And I said, well, according to like the definitions, and then in my head, I'm like, I don't think she knows what definitions mean. So I'm trying to get this out of my head, you know? And I was like, don't tell anyone, but sort of, yes. Don't tell anyone.
Right.
And then she was like, can't I tell anyone?
Yeah.
And so, because some people, it's just not something we share, I'm trying to explain these things to her. And the next day she gets home and she's like, Dad, I told my teacher we're rich. And I said, what are you doing? I told you specifically not to say that.
Yeah.
And it's okay because kids, kids talk and they say things, but we don't want to go out and introduce ourselves by what we have. We want people to get to know us by we're helpful and we're kind.
Right.
And we love other people and all of those things. And she was like, I'm just a really bad kid. And I was like, wait, that's not what I said, but something I communicated must have come down on her too hard. And so I'm a dad trying to ride this line of like, there is behavior that we don't do. Like we don't do that. And you did that. And so I'm not pleased with that behavior.
Right.
But then as a 7-year-old, she's on pendulum swings into like, well, I'm a bad kid, but I didn't say that.
Yeah.
So what I'm asking for advice from you is like understanding what you understand about psychology, developmental belief systems. Is this going to be a constant just pendulum swing all of the time, or are there particular tools that you've used with your children to try to teach them who they are that's not connected to what they have or what they do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I knew how to parent perfectly, then I would be writing every book out there. And probably my kids wouldn't yell at me sometimes.
Okay.
But it's these things are always a tension, right? Because you want to use things like guilt to shape your kid's behavior. And that emotion's a powerful tool for getting them to behave properly, to getting them to be good people. At the same time, you don't want to feel ashamed of who they are. Although in some cultures, some really collectivist cultures, shame is very powerful. So in Japan and China, sometimes I've seen, in some videos, some cross-cultural stuff, parents are like, you're a terrible kid. Like you're a bad kid for doing this and like, disrespecting your parents. And it's normative there. It's normative to kind of like make kids feel that way because you really want them to be a part of the group and to follow the norms. And so everything that we do is kind of grounded in, societal expectation. But, what I try to do with my kids at least, and I think this checks out with the literature too, is make them feel loved, right? You're not a bad kid. You're a good kid. And there's things you could do, I think, to have better behavior. So really separating the kind of like the verb from the noun.
Yeah.
Right. You could do this better. And I think the thing that people miss is we often focus on the negative. So if you want to shape behavior, whether it's with a kid or a dog, it's really about the positive. And you have to reward behaviors that you think it's stupid that I even reward that. Right. You're like, I really appreciate that you didn't hit your sister.
Yeah.
Tonight. Yeah. That was great. And you're like, I shouldn't have, I tell my parents, grandparents, like, why would I have to like, you did a good thing not being a psychopath,
yeah.
But it turns out that is what helps psychopaths, literal psychopaths, like learn their behavior better.
Really?
Because they're insensitive to punishment. And so what the human mind learns best is reward. And with a dog, you're not like, bad dog, bad, bad. When you train dolphins, or zoo animals, you just shape by reward. And so I think that people focus too much on punishment and not enough on rewards, right? Great job, playing for 10 minutes and not getting angry. I really respect that today you didn't mention the fact that we were pretty well off. And that means a lot to me. It makes me really proud that you understand that, like, we don't talk about these things because we don't want other people to feel uncomfortable.
That is great advice, because I don't think I do that at all, unfortunately. I mean, maybe if it's extreme, but I don't reinforce basic table stakes things. So that will change the way I parent.
It's so hard. And it's so hard because you have to pay, we talked about attention, right?
Yeah.
You have to train yourself to notice things that as an adult, you just think you should just live your life that way, right?
Yeah.
But that's the way you shape even like good acts. Oh, I really like that you were kind.
Mm-hmm.
And you keep on shaping it to... Yeah.
Brilliant. Societally, I'm curious about what you think about this. Is it true that depression is the statistical percentage of people with depression is going up?
Good question. I think it is... let me think. One thing I do know, and again, I'm not like a clinical psychologist or an epidemiologist, is that like prescriptions of antidepressants is at an all-time high, and things like anxiety disorders and PTSD, I do know the stuff on this, is like very high, and high even controlling for how much trauma a country faces, if that makes sense. So like our rates of mental illness are sometimes not responding to objective suffering.
Does that mean that people are just becoming less resourceful in how to mentally manage problems, even though the problems are not getting bigger? Does that indicate that?
Yeah. I think one argument is that people are less resilient. Two is that the environments that we're facing are just not like what our bodies are used to, right? Like we're constantly stressed, like going back to the, in the ancestral environments, we'd be a little stressed getting chased by a lion, but then we calm down. But right now we're like constantly worried about the fate of the world. We're constantly on social media. And then there's the question of whether like life has as much meaning as it used to. We're not connected to churches, civic associations, right? We're just kind of like a soul person floating through like the void of nothingness. And so that could be hard for our psychology.
Okay. I want to come back to that in a second, but when you say prescription medication, are you talking like SSRIs?
Yeah.
Are those the main form of antidepressants?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. To my knowledge, like I'm like super scientist. So I'm like, if I'm not certain, I'm going to say I'm not totally certain.
I appreciate that about you. Yeah. Cause I now I know where to land with things. Is there a social contagion element to depression?
There's a social contagion element to a lot of things. So there's things, have you seen these like laughing fits that get contagious? Like these crazy examples?
No.
So it's like, I don't know, psychosomatic or whatever, but there's these videos. I think it was like a school in Africa, a country in Africa, where like someone started having these like laughing fits, and then like another person in the class had their laughing fit, and then all of a sudden everyone's has these like uncontrollable laughter, and they couldn't stop it, and they came in, like the doctors came in and like, well, there's no like medical reason for this. And so it's a really powerful form of social contagion, of social reality, in effect, right? Like your social environment's like changing your behavior. It has to change your biology in some ways. And so there's lots of cases of that kind of social contagion. Whether depression itself is contagious, I think that the conditions for like ennui and social contagion, or the conditions for ennui and depression, are certainly like social, but I don't know if like I'm like, oh, I get depressed and then like you get depressed because I like psychically cough at you. I don't think that's
psychically. That would be crazy.
That would be crazy.
You did that. The reason I'm curious about it is just like co-regulation.
Oh yeah,
which is like a nervous system and a psychology thing.
Yeah, right.
Does that have any effect of like, are people becoming less happy if their tribes are less happy?
Yeah,
and that seems somewhat subjective, because what makes a person happy? It seems to be an expectation differential.
Yeah, no, happiness is super socially and a kind of environmentally constructed. I mean, certainly in the case if you're living with someone who's depressed, in a relationship, like you're not regulating each other, right? Like it's hard for you. It's drawing on your resources. You're getting like pulled down. And so I think in large ways, if you're feeling overwhelmed, that can certainly make you depressed. And we know there's a lot of literature on like caregiving, like how hard that can be. And then in terms of happiness, right? Like as our like social goal of like, what does it mean to be happy, right? It used to be that in the 50s, if you asked kids like, well, what do you want to do, for your life? And they're like, well, I want to meaningfully impact my country, like I want to be a good person. And today it's like, well, to be happy, I need to be famous on TikTok. Those are not the conditions and the goals that make for happiness. So there is a really powerful way that our social goals shape our happiness, and eventually things like depression, right? You're not like, I'm trying to be the best dad that I can. Like, well, I wish strangers kissed my ass.
Yeah. So from everything you've studied about this, how would you define happiness?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big question. Maybe I'll dodge and say like there's two kinds of happiness that people talk a lot about in literature.
Okay.
And recently a third kind came out based on this new book. And so one is hedonics, right? Like, are you just feeling happy in the moment? This is like cocaine and sex and video games, right? That people chase like the feeling of good. And then two, there's like eudaimonia. This is like Aristotle's thing, right? Like meaning, purpose. I reflect on my life. And as I reflect, I realize I've led a good life. And those are different, right? If you spend your whole life, just masturbating and smoking marijuana, there might be like a lot of time you're hedonically feeling great, but maybe you look back at your life on your deathbed and you're like, it wasn't a life well lived. And then recently this book came out by Shigeo Oishi, a colleague of mine at the University of Chicago, called Life in Three Dimensions. And he argues there's a third dimension in his work, which is just richness. How many different experiences did you try? How many new foods did you do, right? And like there's a sense that you could have a rich life, doing lots of things, even if like it maybe isn't like traditionally meaningful or filled with hedonic joy.
Right.
And so I think all of those things matter, and it almost depends on who the person is. Like my wife and I are really low on hedonics. Like we just, maybe because she's a New Englander, the Protestant work ethic, we're like, yeah, we should work and we should like raise our kids to be good people. And if we're not having fun all the time, it's fine. We don't need to take a lot of vacations. And in fact, when we're on vacation, we're like, I feel like we should be getting something done, you know?
Yeah,
Or it's like, I garden because like I can't relax. Like, okay, you know, that's how, you know, we're built. But for each of us, we need to figure out like what dimension is best for you.
Fascinating. So there's almost like a profile that would determine kind of what happiness would be, almost like a Myers-Briggs or something.
Yeah.
Like a psychometric. Everyone's different.
Everyone's different. But I think there are some things that lead more lasting to happiness, especially as we age, right? So when you're young, you know, you get that feeling, you're like, oh my God, I'm in love for the first time. And like, you know, I've having some alcohol for the first time, or like everything's new and exciting. And our brains are like really like full of dopamine, right? We're trying to learn, we're trying to take in all this novelty, and like driving on a summer's night is just like the most amazing thing you can do with your friends. And now you're like, you know, like, well, like this whiskey isn't quite as like delicious as this other whiskey that I've had once, and you've done it all before. And so I think as you get older, increasingly like meaning matters.
Yeah. As you become a snob on the normal stuff.
Yeah. Well, nothing's new, you know, like what do you have to do that's new? Like, I don't know, go like into outer space. You know, this is why these billionaires are like, I need to go to outer space, because like they've just done everything on Earth.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much can we connect? We talk about happiness in the pursuit of pleasure and meaningful accomplishments and meaningful achievements. Have you looked into the impact that difficulty or suffering would have around the happiness of that moment?
I think especially, well, I think there's the hedonics aspect of it. So if you do something terrible like mountain climb, and you're like, you know, lose a toe from frostbite, right? Like there's not pleasure in that, but just going through that experience can make things after it seem amazing. Like when I was a 19-year-old, I worked looking for natural gas in the Canadian wilderness. It was super cold. We got stuck in the bush one night, no food, freezing, stalked by lynx. And the breakfast I had, or really brunch, because we didn't make it out till noon, that I had that day was amazing, even though it was a shitty motel breakfast, right? Because like everything's heightened because of suffering.
Absolutely.
So there's that kind of suffering. There's also the suffering of like building bonds. If we suffer together, you know, we like endure something and now we're best friends.
Yeah.
But there's only like, you know, so much suffering, so much chronic pain can be really hard for you. So generally what's good is like controllable suffering. But when we construct the narratives of our life, suffering and challenge are incredibly important.
That's what I'm trying to sort of like get to, because I actually heard an interesting story along those lines of a guy who they like dropped him off in Alaska. He went 10 days in the frigid, freezing cold. And he said the most happy experience he's ever had in his entire life, both before and since, was walking into the plane, sitting in the back of the plane, and having a cup of just crap coffee from the airline, because he had been out in the middle of nowhere for 10 days.
Yeah.
So it had a way of like re-altering the hierarchy of pleasure because of suffering. And like when you look at fragilities, like especially in our culture, I wonder if some of the increases in people wanting antidepressants, and there's clinical depression that you have to, it's a biological thing. I get that. But I'm wondering how much of chronic cultural depression is just coming from like the bar for hard is going so low because of our civilization that we're all going to be unhappy because all of us, our lives are too easy. Is that an anecdotal misnomer, or is there literature that backs that idea up?
It maybe depends on the kind of hard. So if you're someone who's like really struggling every day, working 3 jobs for your kids,
Got it.
You know, like that's a kind of hard. And I think you could be, I don't know if you could be depressed or you could be anxious, but like there's a real there.
Yeah.
But I could also imagine that if you, like this ennui that people might feel because, you know, they have a stable job, everything's fine, but they just don't feel fulfilled. I think that's where people do like, I want to do a tough mutter. You know, I want to make it hard so I just like feel alive. And I feel like that's missing from a lot of people's lives, like authentic challenge, authentic threats. You know, and I think people, you know, in the Second World War, you like see Band of Brothers,
Yep.
right? And they're like bonded together in
Yep.
shared suffering. And no one wants to have to do that to feel connected with each other. But it is powerful, right? And I think the most we have today, you know, you're like, wow, that pickleball game was like really intense, or, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's great you're getting out, but we don't have this kind of like really like fighting and suffering together.
Yeah. Yeah. Viktor Frankl, I'm sure you've read Search for Meaning. And then
Right.
there's a book called The Happiest Man Alive. Eddie, I think it's Eddie Jaku, who is also in the camps. And he talks, both of them talk about this, about how like meaning is developed in the difficult, like people would die before they physically died. They would just give up.
Yeah, right.
And I think we're going back to the hedonic treadmill and like normalizing ease. If you say normalizing ease, part of me sometimes is concerned that just our lives are getting a little bit too easy, and we just need to go for something.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a way to fix that with a culture that's like constantly connected to the internet, AC's everywhere. Because I don't want AC to go away. You know,
Absolutely right.
And I like electricity, and plumbing is awesome.
Yeah.
So practically, would you give advice in terms of how to make your life more meaningful? Would you say that part of that is like find something big to throw yourself behind, like go for it? Or is the solution more mental than it is physical?
It's a great point. I mean, everyone's trying to be frictionless, right? Uber Eats, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like everything just comes to you now. I'll get to the question in a sec, but there's one finding that my wife told me about that I really love. It's about super agers. Like, who are the people as they age who stay sharp, stay nimble, stay healthy into their old age. And it's really correlated with people who try to do difficult things, right? Who keep pushing themselves.
Yeah.
Because that's what keeps you learning. Like, exercise is a pain in the ass,
Yep.
right? To keep on doing that, or trying new skills, or keep working, right? It's easy to be like, I'm going to retire. I'm just going to sit at home. I'm going to watch TV. That's the most frictionless thing you could do. And it basically leads to cognitive decline.
And you die.
Yeah, exactly.
You retire and you die.
Exactly. There's like nothing there anymore. And so I think there is something really powerful about trying something that's really hard, especially something that helps others, right? We talked about like how helping others makes you stronger. So really pushing yourself to do good. Like, it's also a selfish society, right? Like, how do I maximize my own productivity so that I can make more widgets in my day? You know, like, it's great, right? Like, you can get up at 5 a.m. and then like, you know, you see these like influencers, like, I work out at 5 a.m. and I meditate, and like, it's all about you, right? Like, where's the hour where you're like, and then I'm like dealing with my kids and I make sure they get off to school, and, you know, I give them big hugs. Like, no, there's no like LinkedIn influencer who's like, you know, I snuggle my kids for a long time, and boy, it's like so self-focused. So I think if we can do something that's hard and also something that like focuses on the other and the community, it like goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been really working on that, mentioning like just the kids and snuggles, because you see my kids are here and I work from home a lot. And a lot of times when they come in, it's not a convenient time for them to come in. So sometimes the hardest thing I can do is pause what I'm doing. And my 3-year-old wants to play chase. I'm like, well, it's not physically difficult, but it's psychologically difficult because I've got a lot to do. And so I think it's an interesting frame for parents to be like, how do I make sacrifices that are not just for more money?
Yeah.
But like to help my child, or to be with my spouse, or any of these things, you know. I have a question for you on this topic. What are some dreams that you have? You're talking about like hard things that are going to matter to others. You're well accomplished, well studied. You have, you know, the credentials, the respect. But what do you have any dreams for your life that are going to be difficult, that could make the world a better place, that you're kind of pushing towards in the back of your minds?
Yeah. I mean, I have some things I'm pushing myself to do that are like pretty self-focused, like lift weights and play the banjo.
The banjo. Let's go.
Yeah, I'm not good. I'm not good. In fact, I thought I was better earlier than I do now. You get that like little bump of like, oh, I can play this song. And I'm like, I play the song very poorly.
Yep.
But I need to do something that I'm like really bad at. I think it's good for me just to be like, I'm shitty at the banjo, but I'm going to power through.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky that my job affords me the opportunity to like mentor students and like connect with a lot of folks and help them in a like a science way and help them along their career. I know there are other people who are really good at helping people directly, like clinical psychologists, have practices and they help other people directly. That's not me. I thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I volunteered at a hospital for one afternoon, and I left early.
That's all it took. Yeah.
I was with people who were really anxious.
That's tough.
And they had psychopathology, and I'm like, I hope these people get help. I gotta go.
Yeah.
And so I try to do science and write books that's gonna like help people like have better relationships. And so I try to do that, and every day is a challenge. Every day is hard. Every day I get rejections. It keeps me young. Other scientists being like, your work's terrible, give it up. But
they say that?
Scientists are harsh. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's like the whole like scientific enterprise runs on peer review. So like I'll write a paper and then I'll send it to a journal, and then like 3 people in secret will tell me what they think of it. And because they're secret, they, they can say terrible things. It's better now than it used to be because we try to be kinder now. Yeah. But it's like, don't waste your time. When I was junior and like no one respected me, it's like, this is terrible and like you're terrible and, go die.
Does that
oh not quite so much, but like metaphorically for sure.
Does that still hurt even today, or have you become immune to that, or does it still kind of hit you?
I've become a little inured to it. Like it doesn't hurt as much, but my students still get upset, and so I get upset on their behalf. But going back to the hedonic treadmill, like it used to be when I got a paper, I feel like elated. Like, oh wow, it's so great. My like first paper, my second paper. I think right now I've got like 140.
Wow.
And so every time I get a paper, I just feel like relief that like I'm not getting beat up anymore about this paper. So I'm happy for my students, but now I'm just like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
It's just like a weird profile.
You have the reps in that you're kind of like normalized to probably the good and maybe some of the bad.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, going back to your thing about like, what can we do? I think if we can be pretty surprised at how much kind of suffering we can endure and how much grief, and it makes us stronger. So when I was 15, 16, I guess 16, 17, I used to do door-to-door sales for like the newspaper. And I would be out there like 2-3 hours a night or like all day on a Saturday, just like trying to get people to buy the Calgary Herald, my local newspaper. And they were just monsters to me.
Yeah.
They would like call me all sorts of names. And at first I was like, it's so terrible. And after that, like, just like the rage, maybe that's why I'm good at bridging divides. Like the rage just like goes over you,
Yeah.
Like you get yelled at every day for 2 years.
The best salesmen in the world are Jehovah's Witness.
Oh yeah.
Because they just get rejected nonstop until they just don't even feel it anymore.
Yeah.
So if you can hire them, I mean, great. If a lot of them you can't, but it's things like that. Door-to-door sales is tough.
Look, I feel like it made me who I am today. And for that reason, every time I get a spam caller, I see it as a chance for human connection.
Really?
Like you just like talk with folks, I get some guy tell me that the Customs and Border Patrol were going to arrest me. This like random guy. He's like, we intercepted something at the border for you, and like you're in a lot of trouble. I'm like chilling at the airport. I got some time. I'm like, oh no, what did they intercept? Oh, no. He's like, it's bad. I was like, how bad is it? I know he's trying to get me to give my bank information, but I'm like, here's half an hour and we can talk. And it was like better. I'm feeling good because we're having a conversation, and he's not like, getting some grandma to give up her retirement savings.
You're using the CIV on him.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we're having a conversation. I'm talking about all the fake drugs and like guns that I'm trying to send up from Mexico. Obviously I'm not doing, but he's trying to tell me, and he's like, you're in so much trouble. It's like nice to have conversation. I feel like we need more of that social connection.
Oh my gosh. It's like Scammer Payback, but at a much more chill level.
Yeah, right.
Have you seen that channel?
Yeah, totally. Totally.
That's what happens when a scientist gets a scam call. Like, now we're going to study the scammer.
Yeah, we can connect. Every chance is a chance for connection.
I thought you were going to say, like, when I asked you about your dreams, like climb Mount Everest or something. So I think maybe you should consider an Everest climb one of these days.
There's a lot of corpses.
There are, but that's why we do hard things.
Yeah.
so that we can be happier, right?
Yeah. You know,
Hey, go live it out, man. Let's
you
go
know,
see it.
you know,
That's how you get episode 2.
yeah, there's a lot of, I'm doing some work right now on like narratives, like how you see your own life. And like, you can construct a narrative even from the events of your life.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, I've been stuck in the wilderness. That was enough. You know, I can construct narratives that I'm like a hero, do the hero's journey in my own life without having to climb Everest.
Is there anything you can share on the work you're doing, like self-concept stuff with narrative identity, or are you too premature?
No, we've got some published stuff out there, and it's been downloaded like 100,000 times already. This like
Really?
scientific paper, it's like nerdy paper. People love it. It's basically this idea of like we're feeling like we lack meaning in our world, and one way that we get meaning is through stories and thinking of our life as a story. But some stories are much better than others, right?
Yeah.
And probably the best, most meaningful story in our culture, many cultures, is the hero's journey. So we have some work showing that if you think about your life as a hero's journey, and we have an intervention to help people do that, they feel like they have more meaning, less depression, good stuff. Yeah.
Amazing. When you look at like some of the craziest movements in history, good or bad, do you have one in mind that comes to mind that you could sort of like take us through a profiling of how a message of morality or whatever can take over the minds around them, like just from a historical standpoint? Do any crazy movements come to mind?
I mean, the classic one that social psychology was founded in reaction to was the Third Reich, you know, Nazism.
So like, how do we prevent that from happening again?
Yeah. Well, there's like, you know, you're a person of history, right? There's historical things like the Treaty of Versailles makes a country feel victimized. They're not allowed to be proud. They're not allowed to feel good about themselves. And so tied to that kind of sense of like, I don't know, shame. Indignation, right? No one likes feeling contempt towards them. It's a huge driver of outrage, right? Like people feel contempt towards you. You feel like you've been taken down a notch. No one likes feeling that way. And then there's a sense of here's someone who promises to make your country better, like it used to be in the past, you know, like much greater than it is right now. And then you feed that with like this like really powerful sense of like, well, this group, they're the ones who are causing this evil, right? And then you pair this victimhood narrative with a chance to be successful and powerful. And then, you know, there's some randomness involved that allows you to kind of rise to power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you concerned with the similarities between that and current era?
I think a lot of populist movements have the same recipe. And then the question is whether there are enough kind of checks and balances in the country to prevent that from happening, and whether the will of the citizens of the country is like aligned enough to let that happen, right? And so anytime there's a populist movement, these things could potentially happen, but I'm not sure. You know, I can't see the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with the Treaty of Versailles and post-treaty and with the Third Reich is the will of the majority of the populace was in alignment. From what I've learned, like they were wanting the same things,
right?
So there was alignment. But is that like a mental infection, or was that natural and organic? Was it created? Because a lot of what we know about Edward Bernays like came from studying Third Reich propaganda, or even a little bit before then. They were masters at just, if you repeat the same message enough times, then people will. And is that sort of happening now? Do you think that we could ever go into that spot? Not just conjecture, but like, are the fabric ingredients of our society healthy enough right now to have those checks and balances, or are there things that you're like, no, we need to watch this?
I'd like to think that our society has the checks and balances nationally and internationally. I mean, it's very true that people vote in their own self-interest. And so for the Third Reich, when that happened, those people did want some version of what happened. I think not the kind of extreme, right? They weren't literally voting.
They just got out of control.
The Holocaust, that's right.
Yeah.
But there's a flywheel that starts, people want this, they elect someone, that person wants power, and et cetera, it goes and goes. But I'd like to think that we have enough organizations and enough people in our country that want to connect and don't want that kind of situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Last question on this topic. Are there cues or heuristics or things that sort of like raise your alarms when you notice someone could be using like moral manipulation to create this type of societal manipulation of opinion? Like, are there phrases that people say, or like from your study, like how do we become alerted to that so that we don't just take everything at face value?
Yeah.
And sort of know like this doesn't seem right.
Yeah. I mean, really the kind of like villain victim like template, I'm super sensitive. So if someone says these people are evil and they are harming our kids, then that immediately trips my like tripwire for like moral manipulation. And again, sometimes it is true. There are like bad people out there doing bad things, like Epstein, obviously classic example. But whenever someone says, there's a threat out there and they're coming for us. I was just listening to something about the Jonestown kind of massacre, the cult where everyone took the cyanide.
Oh, okay.
And that final speech where Jim Jones was convincing everyone to drink cyanide was really, these people are coming to get us. Am I getting it wrong? Am I making this up?
No, I've just never heard this before. So I'm like, wait, this is a thing that people like did?
Yeah. I didn't know his name, but I remember the story now.
Check like Jonestown Massacre. I don't know, sometimes. Yeah, Jonestown Massacre Band. Jesus Christ. The Brian Jonestown. Yeah, Jonestown people. Jim Jones, that's right. Guyana. Yeah.
You got a bunch of people to kill themselves.
Yeah.
And this was a religious group too, right?
This was a religious group. They were all trying to find a better world. And Jim Jones, the cult leader, right, they all signed on because they wanted to go somewhere where there was like less racism and people could live in harmony, white folks, black folks, free of like the moral decay of America. But then they got to Guyana. It was really terrible. Jim Jones realized that everything was going to hell. He was losing his power. And so he basically used his influence, but all sorts of like words that you mentioned, right? Like just reinforce things like, we're going to transcend. They're coming to get us. They're coming to get us. And would have euphemisms for suicide. And so he would kind of like change people's minds by using language to think, well, suicide's not so bad. And like, we're victims. And there's like a nebulous, vague, like people out there coming to get us, right? Just like constant threat all the time. And then most people voluntarily, killed themselves to follow him, but other people who didn't want to were compelled by the armed guard. It's a crazy, terrible cult story.
When was this?
This was
70s?
in 1978.
Yeah.
November 18, 1978.
Yeah. It's like one of the biggest like cult massacres in history.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I would hope that could happen today at some point that would have to get out on social media or something. There would be whistleblowers today probably, right?
Yeah, there were whistleblowers
right?
there. Well, Heaven's Gate, that happened in the 90s, and people voluntarily, I forget what drank barbiturates, covered their heads with plastic bags and like died. That's where all the black Nikes came from. They died so they could go to the spacecraft that was going behind Comet Hale-Bopp.
Said members believe that human bodies were merely containers for the soul and that by shedding them, they would ascend to an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Exactly.
Trailing the Hale-Bopp comet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
UFO religious cult.
Yeah. Yeah. They also felt kind of under attack, but it's like they created their own special reality. So it's hard to do that in a big, diverse society, but you could try it, right? These are the threats. This is
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's easier to do if you can use religion.
it's true.
I mean, that seems to compress the time necessary to. I mean, we talked about this earlier, that there's the debates around hypnosis. But if there's religion involved, it seems to be easier to get somebody programmed because there's a greater power or something.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're pretty hardwired to think about, to believe in gods and supernatural agents. And especially if you can say, look, you are persecuted, your life here sucks, but there's something amazing, something that's hedonically amazing and meaningful in the afterlife.
Yeah.
What a promise.
Yeah.
One thing that is a little bit concerning that you might be interested in is that this one got people to do it based upon they believe that the end of the world was about to happen any moment.
Mm-hmm.
Which you look at the theology of the rapture, and it's like that's just another, because the rapture is not really scriptural to my understanding of it. I'm going to get a lot of flack for this in the comments, but at least you don't get the flack. I'll take the flack for it. But it was an invention to get people properly motivated to do certain things. But that's where I'm concerned right now, because it's like I can see how I think narratives are being constructed to get people to do things they wouldn't normally do.
Mm-hmm.
Like no one would go on the internet and and just like hang their flag by hating a group of people unless they thought God wanted them to do that.
Right.
And I think that's actually a man-made construction to get people grouped apart.
Again, right? Like we're groupie species, but I think when you think that like God is behind your groupiness, it supercharges it. Yeah. One super interesting thing that a super interesting study was done, like a classic social psychologist. It's a book called When Prophecy Fails. It was written by Leon Festinger. The term cognitive dissonance? Mm-hmm. He was the dude that came up with that term.
Oh, wow.
And so he went into a doomsday cult. He like infiltrated this doomsday cult. They thought the world was going to end on this particular day. Everyone moved into this house. Everyone sold all their possessions. And he was interested in what happens when the world doesn't end, when they said they would. And I think this was back in the 50s or 60s. And, the world's going to end this day. The day comes, the world doesn't end. And then he's like, what do you do? Is everyone like, my bad. I'm going to go back and get my old job and tell my friends that, we're friends again, and tell my boss that I was sorry for, telling him to screw off. And of course not, right? Because they already invested so much that they just doubled down on their belief. They're like, well, we got the math wrong. The world's going to end a month from now. And so this powerful cognitive dissonance, when it's the rapture or anything else, like just because your beliefs about the end of the world are disconfirmed doesn't mean you relinquish those beliefs. In fact, it means you believe them even more.
Yeah, which is like it racks up sunk cost bias to force you into the trench.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you just see religion at the heart of so much of this. Mm-hmm. Okay. Changing gears.
Okay.
The psychological ruptures, fractures, things like that. What would you say is the closest psychological equivalent to what Christians would say is like demon possession?
I think the investigations of those things suggest that there's like even debates about this, but like dissociative identity disorders, dissociative states, fugue states, all these things. I think they would argue that it's possible for you to dissociate enough that there's like another presence there, another personality. But again, these things are like quite socially constructed in some ways, like the laughing fits we talked about. Yeah. These things tend to have patterns, right? Like if someone gets possessed by a demon in a particular village, people study this today, right? If there's a village where there's a demon possession and someone else gets possessed by a demon quite close after them, and if you think that demon possessions are real, then you'd say, well, maybe the demon kind of like popped over to the new person. But if you don't, then you think, well, this person learned that when you're possessed by a demon, and it's usually kind of like marginalized people who are not getting a lot of attention, like young women, then here's a chance that they get a lot of attention from their group. They get a lot of concern from very serious, powerful people, like a priest might come. And so it's not saying that that's intentionally doing it to like get attention, but it's at least like socially reinforced, even if like the roots of it are unclear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just for them, like, belief on my end, I think that there are demons and demon possession, but I think when you look at like the same areas of the world where we got a lot of our study from nocebos and placebos, people were dying, and in postmortems there was nothing in the body that would have caused it. It's like they believed that they were cursed, and so therefore their body just responded biologically to a belief system they had. There's a book called The Expectation Effect.
Oh yeah.
Which is insane because there's all these stories about like a person was misdiagnosed with cancer, and they said they were going to die on December 24th. They died on December 24th, and then the postmortem, the autopsy, they actually got the diagnosis wrong.
Right, my bad.
So like, how did he die?
Yeah.
Or you've seen these studies where you take a group of people who have asthma and you give them water vapor.
Oh yeah.
And you tell them that that's an antagonist, and they all have asthma fits. It's like, that's not possible. But because they believe it. And so I think a lot of people who would think that they're being cursed or possessed or all of these things, sometimes I think that is the case. But then sometimes I think it's actually a narrative that we've just subscribed to. And that seems to be backed up both by my spiritual training and the scientific literature, because we have this whole study of like, whatever you believe is true, you can sort of make true, Right.
Especially with our social behaviors. Have you heard of susto?
No.
It's this super interesting phenomena in Aboriginal cultures in Australia. It's called soul death, basically, is a translation. And if someone does something really bad in the tribe, what they do is they have this kind of a special bone, like a wand you can imagine, and they point at them to kind of like cast them outside of the tribe. And the anthropologist who recorded this phenomena, basically, the tribe member kind of goes, I don't know, like 30 feet away, 40 feet away from the tribe, and then they just die.
Whoa.
Like there's nothing physically wrong with them, like you say, but just they get this, and the medical argument is they get this like incredible, overwhelming stress reaction that if you're not part of your tribe in the desert in Australia, you're going to die anyways.
Yeah,
right?
might as well make it fast.
Exactly. And so they get this like a real psychosomatic like stress reaction where like just explosion of cytokines that ultimately kills you because of the psychological thing. And again, you can't replicate that in the lab, right? Like you can't, Ohio State undergraduate, susto, just like let them die over there.
Yeah.
Ethics would not give us approval, but it's a pretty powerful thing.
It probably wouldn't work anyways, just because our heuristics are so different.
Exactly.
Like you couldn't, we wouldn't believe that anyways.
That's right. Right. The narrative you talk about, right? Like the narratives become reality.
You have to believe it.
Right. Deep.
For your body to come to it. With dissociative disorders and DID, is schizophrenia, does that belong to that camp, or is schizophrenia different?
I think schizophrenia is understood as different. So, but there's a funny thing about mental illness, right? Clinicians like to put everything in really neat boxes. They're like, this is anxiety, this is depression. There's so much comorbidity, correlation between these disorders. And so they don't separate very cleanly because the brain and society is not cleanly separated into these things.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that like schizophrenia and psychosis is separate from these kind of dissociative disorders, but like you could imagine that dissociating makes you more likely to believe things that people would label psychotic.
Yeah. Have you seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind?
Yep.
What did he have?
Schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia?
Yeah.
That's a great movie, by the way.
Yeah, I think like paranoid schizophrenia.
Yeah.
But like these things are all social constructions, right? Not only social constructions, but there's a powerful amount of social construction. There's this paper, it's a classic called Being Sane in Insane Places. And it's like a psychology PhD checked himself into a hospital and what does he say? He's like,
I've read
you
this.
know this?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I'm hearing these words like thud, cold, and like empty. And they're like, yeah, you probably have schizophrenia. And they check him in to a hospital, and the doctors treat him in such a way to basically confirm he has mental illness, right? They like ignore everything he says. The only people who know that he is not, quote, crazy are the other patients. The other patients are like,
You're not crazy.
You're not crazy. You're like, what are you doing here? But the doctors are like, yes, like we'll see you with therapy, and just like, it's like this totally self-confirming thing.
The only thing that would have made that, this is bad. I'm going to confess this. This is what I thought when I read that. It's like the only thing that would make that better is if he actually became insane because of the way he was treated.
I mean,
but yeah, that could have happened.
Yeah. I mean, these things do happen, right? I mean, you are totally infantilized and you get angry and you're given these drugs. I mean, if you're treated one way long enough, you start to act that way.
You believe that you are, and so you become it.
Yeah. Here's a funny, it's not about mental illness, but here's a story that connects to that. So when I was 20, I was like in college, whatever, I was living by myself, good student. And my cousin was graduating. And so I went to visit my cousin, and it's a really big family, my Nebraska family. Talk about it in the book a little bit. But there's like all the kids, they hang out, and all the grownups, they hang out. And I was with the kids. Right, because even though I was 20, I was still like the kids' crew. So I ate at the kids' table, and the grown-ups ate at the grown-ups' table. And then turns out my cousin, his girlfriend was downtown, and like he wanted to see it, but like he wasn't allowed to see her. It was like a little Romeo and Juliet, and like the adults weren't letting us say what we wanted to say. And then all of a sudden, like I was getting angsty. I was listening to like My Chemical Romance, and
what did you do, bro? I don't know why the music just started playing.
That's weird.
Back to you.
Oh yeah, that's funny.
No one will hear it, but
God?
Music randomly started playing as you're talking about sitting at the kids' table.
All right.
Okay.
So we want to go see my cousin's girlfriend. The adults won't let us. I'm getting angry. I'm listening to My Chemical Romance. I'm like grown-ups, they won't let us do what we want to do. And so we sneak out in the night, and we like bike downtown, and I'm like, talking shit to my parents, and I'm like being a bad kid. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm a grown-up. I'm paying bills, I'm living by myself, but then I'm just in that context where I'm being treated like a kid. I'm expected to be a kid, and then I'm a kid, an angry kid. And so these, self-fulfilling prophecies are powerful.
I've learned that lesson the hard way from just managing a bunch of staff and team and hundreds and hundreds of people. And it took me a while to figure this out, anecdotally almost, like through experience, that people will sort of rise to whatever you expect them to be, but they'll also fall to whatever level you expect them to be. And so it becomes really problematic with like a CEO or an entrepreneur when you're expecting everyone to be not as smart as you. Guess what? No one's as smart as you.
Right.
And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because they actually are as smart as you,
right?
But they begin to act as if they're not. And part of the game with, I think, leadership development is just like people will become who you expect them to be.
Absolutely.
So but that takes a lot of humility to be able to like, the world might be these people might be smarter than I am, and acknowledging that I have gaps and biases and all. And if you can just accept that you have biases, half of the stuff that you're trying to fix in the world might start working itself out.
I mean, the end goal of so many of social psychology is just humility. Recognizing that I could do a bad thing. I could believe the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And it's changed my life so much in so many little ways. Like if one thing we know in social psychology is that people will not stand up as a social bystander because they're always thinking that someone else will do it. So if you see a bad thing, everyone's like,
looking around.
Yeah. And so now I try to stand up because I just know the facts. So I think the more people learn about themselves through science, I mean, even through scripture, if that's how you're inclined to just take these insights and have humility, and you will be, better.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever studied something in a person's mind or a phenomenon and thought like this, it almost feels spiritual? Like, have you thought through what is the spirit, and is there something that is the spiritual, or are you really trying to condense everything down into just like the Newtonian type of approach to like it's a bodily function, or does that question make sense?
Yeah. It's an interesting question because, if God kind of created the body, right, and created humans to know him or her, if that's how you believe, then religion and spirituality is intrinsically a bodily thing, a brain thing, And so there have been some studies, and this connects to some research on the God helmet. You heard about this?
Mm-mm.
You basically stimulate parts of people's brain. You like put a helmet on them. And I think often it's, it's like you cover their face so they don't see anything, a sensory deprivation. And you stimulate areas of the brain that are associated or correlated with people having spiritual experiences, meditation, spiritual awakenings, so forth. And if you stimulate those areas of the brain, you fairly reliably get the experience of God. People feel like God is there. They're experiencing some awakenings. I mean, you can do it with psilocybin. You can take mushrooms and
psychedelics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's a classic study where they basically give people in seminary training psychedelics. And
do they know it?
Yeah, I don't think they know if they got... Well, I think that's a great question. I don't know. But I do know the results of the studies that those people who got psychedelics and went to this sermon were more likely to become practicing preachers down the road. Right? They found themselves more transformed. So I think religion, is biological. It is in the brain. Some people think that dampens or like takes away from it, and other people think it doesn't.
I don't think it does, personally. Do you?
Mm-mm.
I don't think it does. No. But I think people will because they don't understand it. I would be curious to know if it was like a blind study though, because that would be even more fascinating.
Yeah.
If they didn't know it, because then there's no like pre-frames.
Yeah. I mean, the neuroscience is just like, this is the big question when it comes to like knowing about how the brain works. Like, if you know that you are a biological creature, then does that lessen our experience? And there's like this amazing study on free will. Do you know this? You heard this, like the Libet study?
Mm-mm.
It's like a super cool study. They put an EEG cap on people's heads, like measures your electric waves of your brain. And they had people move their finger whenever they wanted. And they measured 3 parts of their brain. One is the part that moved the finger, like your motor cortex. And then one is the part, actually 2 parts. They just measured 2 parts. The motor cortex, and then the supplementary motor area, which is the part of your brain that starts gearing up to activate the motor cortex to move your finger. Yeah? So it's like a chain. Supplementary motor area, motor cortex, finger.
Got it.
And so they had people watch like a stopwatch going quick. And all they did was tell people, move your finger, and then remember the time on the stopwatch when you got when you made the conscious decision to move your finger. Okay?
Okay.
So they move their finger, let you be walking, you'd be like, okay, when it was 20, 80. Okay, so you just report when you got the conscious decision, when you made the choice, the free choice. And then they looked across all those data and they compared when people on average made the choice to move their finger, did the brain activity start after they made the choice or before? Because if you have free will, the conscious decision should come before the brain started to move your finger.
Right.
And what they found is that the conscious decision came on average, I think, 200 milliseconds after
No way.
your brain already started to move your finger.
How?
It turns out your brain just makes the decisions. Your brain's like, I'm moving your finger. And then you're like, I am moving my finger. And then you move your finger. I mean, it's about like the split brain patients too, right? Where you just like, get up, and you get up. And you're like, why'd you get up? You're like, well, I want it to stretch. It's like the same kind of argument, which is that your brain decides to do stuff based on the world and based on, maybe your preferences, but like it unconsciously decides to do stuff. And then only after do you get this like conscious urge to do it. Only then do you make the conscious decision.
Dude, we're running out of time, but I got to get you back to talk about the subconscious at some point, because I would imagine that drives a pretty decent amount of human behavior.
There's a lot of stuff on, unconscious, mindlessness.
We're going to run out of time if we go there.
What is it? At the end, just throw out like free will is an illusion.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Exactly. We'll put that on the thumbnail.
There you go.
Dr. Kurt Gray. No one has free will. Okay. I want to wrap us with these two questions. So you got anything you want to hit? Or are you okay?
I'm good right now.
Okay. You have a very robust sense of right and wrong, good and bad. It's interesting that because you have so much study and so much data that you probably are not always voicing personal opinions all of the time because you understand how these different tribes and morality works. But I'm interested in any personal beliefs that you have or that you see as a society that you are worried could be wrong.
So I am a committed pluralist, which is this idea that we need I can't even say the word. That's why no one uses the word pluralism.
It's like a tough one.
It's a stupid word. A plurality of opinions. Okay. So we are better off in a democracy when people disagree.
Yep.
But the opinions and beliefs that I think do not fit are anti-pluralist opinions. So the KKK, right? People who think that other people do not deserve a voice. People who think that other people deserve less of a voice. Those are the beliefs that I think are harmful. And those are the beliefs that I think we should discourage. Then again, this makes me such a scientist or a pluralist, right? We do live in America, and the First Amendment is pretty absolute. Mm-hmm. And so we do allow speech from even hate groups. And, once you start condemning hate speech, well, then you could use maybe that for like political aims, right? Mm-hmm. Which is why we have the First Amendment. And I should also say that there are some people who truly believe in pluralism, but will still engage with anti-pluralists. And so Daryl Davis is a black man, a blues musician, and he has dedicated a lot of his life to befriending KKK members.
Wow.
So these are people who literally hate him for his race. And he says, let's grab coffee. Let's sit down in conversation, and I will do the sieve basically with you. Mm-hmm. And so they will tell him like, the reason that they're like, well, I'm not racist. They'll say they're not racist, right? But the reason that, I think that, white supremacy is because black men are violent. And the reason I know that is because prisons are filled with black men. And so what Mr. Davis would do is we'll sit down and we'll like ask them questions to get at their experiences. And only once he connects and understands with them will he say, well, could there be another reason why prisons are filled with black men? Like systemic bias and so forth. And eventually he comes to understand that they're afraid, these KKK members, they see threat, they're worried about their family, they're worried about society, all the things we already talked about. Yeah. And he gets them to hang up their robes. And so I don't know if I have that kind of patience.
I'm going to say he's a bigger man than I am.
Especially when people hate it. Like we're white guys, and there's not a lot of people who just like hate us because of our race. And so the fact that he can do that, I think is incredible. But I'm not a big fan of anti-pluralist beliefs.
Yeah. Are there any beliefs that come to mind that as you've grown in your studies, like just things that you had to change your stance on that come to mind to demonstrate this?
So I grew up in Canada, and, there's a typical political views in Canada, even though I grew up in the Texas of Canada, where there's like oil and beef and conservatism, right? Like, I think taxes should be generally high. I think we shouldn't have handguns, just from how I grew up, right? You just like, you're the politics are baked into you.
Yeah.
You know, and then I lived in the South for a long time, and I got to know some folks who disagreed with me politically. I took a Groupon once and I shot a handgun. And like, it was like a total sketchy, like, here's your Glock and here's some ammo, like, go nuts.
Feel dirty afterwards?
Yeah. Well, I felt great.
Exactly.
You know, it felt amazing. You know, like you're firing a gun, like just the power, the personal power. And like, I would still never have a gun in the house because I know the statistics, but I can definitely resonate with someone who feels like they want a gun to protect their family.
Yeah.
Same with taxation. You know, I still believe that we should have high taxes, especially, you know, on the ultra wealthy, to kind of like really support the marginalized folks that do exist in society and that do have struggle living. But I was on this panel after the book came out, and someone's like, look, I believe in helping, you know, the disenfranchised too, but I just don't trust the government to do good things with my taxes. You know, we know MK Ultra, you know, the government has done all sorts of terrible things with our money, and I don't want them deciding what to spend my money on. I thought that was a reasonable perspective, right?
That's valid.
You know, I think I still disagree because people are not donating that much of their money as they would if we taxed it. But I can understand where they're coming from, and I think that's the goal of my work, understanding.
Do you want my viewpoint on that or no?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because I grew up in America, and we have my pastors, the church we go to, they immigrated or they moved here from Australia. Australia and Canada are probably more similar than Canada and America in terms of how we're programmed in school.
We're probably Canada's halfway between America and Australia, but yeah.
They're hardcore. And this was a while ago. And so the topic of like, you know, guns, and this was during like the COVID stuff. And I remember saying like, look, we're like raised in America to like, we celebrate the American Revolution, which was literally like treason rebellion.
Yeah, right.
That was a good thing to us.
Yeah.
And so of course, if you come in
Canada, Australia never rebelled.
No.
Never.
If you come in and you're like, hey, you know, this is bad. We're like, we've been programmed our whole lives with this. This is how we became a country. And so there, you can see even that in like the data sets that are different. But to this person who's like, I don't trust the government, I think that the reason sometimes we have a conundrum, because there's all this fraudulent spending that's come out, and whether all of it's true or probably half of it's true, to be honest. But then we have a similar thing in the church. So it's like churches aren't using their money to take care of the disenfranchised, and the government is not using them. So I think a lot of Americans who have critical thinking are like, well, where do I give money to?
Right. Joel Osteen has a private jet.
Yeah, I'm not going to give it to Joel. Like, so we almost have a problem where it's like, we have to go find these people ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to have to be fixed. Because no one wants to be taxed, and then the tax money is going to like kill other people in other countries.
Yeah, right. Right.
I don't want that. But then you can give money away. We're incentivized to give money away because we pay less in taxes, and those are going to private jets. Yeah. So what do we do? It's a societal issue. It's so hard. And even the military, I remember played a little bit of poker. I was in Vegas. I was like sitting next to this guy, and you know, it was like 10 people on the table. And so there wasn't a lot of action. And he's like, he's from the South. So where are y'all from? It's like, oh, I'm from Canada. He's like, I will never understand Canada. It's like, oh, it's like, well, every minute Russia could come over the Arctic and destroy you. And you are so weak without a powerful military. And I sleep well knowing that we have the most powerful military in the world. And I was like, you're a different kind of guy than I am. But also it's a little true, right? I mean, strong fences build strong neighbors. And like, so maybe military spending, I've changed my mind maybe a little bit on that too. And so it's hard to know where to have the most bang for your buck when it comes to spending. And I think one thing that unites us, I think is you're right, is that we all feel like we should be doing more for society, but we don't know how. Yeah. Yeah. You just used your psychology background on me. There you go. A great connection point. You're an optimistic guy, it seems. I feel like you have to be to write about bridging divides. If we could just take you into a quick frame, is there anything that scares you about human nature that you've uncovered as you've studied more of it? I mean, most things about human nature are a little scary. I mean, we're tribal.
fear motivates us more than anything. And so I think so many studies in psychology show, we'll murder someone with polite insistence. We'll give up our convictions just to fit into the group. It's like pessimist after pessimist after pessimist finding. And yet I still think that we've developed culture, and science in particular gives me a lot of hope that we can overcome these things. We can be healthier and happier, maybe not ever truly happy, but live better amongst each other. I try to be happy, but if you look at how we evolved in nature, it doesn't scream, harmony.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. What's your favorite memory of all time?
Oh, wow. I tell my wife and kids that I hate this question. Like the one, because I never remember anything. I moved around so much as a kid that I just don't encode things anymore. But I would have to say that there have been some times in my life where I have intentionally encoded memories.
Ooh.
I have said, I never remember anything, but I have said, this is a moment that I want to think back to, and I want to remember it. So I've like a computer, hit the save button.
Yes.
And those memories are almost all snuggling with my kids. I remember one time at my sister-in-law's wedding, I was sitting in a hammock in the woods with I guess she was 2 at the time, my daughter, and we were swinging back and forth looking at the sky, and she was asking me all sorts of inane kid questions about the world. Yeah. And it was just awesome, and I knew that humans are, messy biological creatures, and this is the thing I helped create, this little creature next to me, and it wouldn't be this way for long. So I just really tried to hold on to that. And I think all the memories that I try to remember are like that, not memories of triumph, but memories of connection.
Amazing. This is a beautiful answer. Thanks for sharing your brain with us for a couple hours.
Of course.
And I can't wait to talk about subconscious next time.
Do it.
Yeah. Cool. Love you guys. See ya.